Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Possessed Stan Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Brother, why can't you see it? He was bleeding. The fact that he was slowly losing consciousness was a clear sign that he was slowly dying. Slowly and painfully, as he watched his brother slowly walk towards him. With a wall for support, he could do nothing but slowly try to sit up, not realizing how the hole in his side flared with pain. It's gone. Away from my body. Away from your hands, he screamed before coughing up a large glob of blood. Oh my dear brother. The big man was now standing right in front of the other man, looking down at him. There was something like sympathy and even regret in his face. That lone meta skill you tried to hide from me, the one you thought would interest me. Suddenly the man's face was completely expressionless. That wasn't even close to what I really wanted from you. And before the other brother could even try to understand what he had meant, blackness took over his vision. The last thing he felt were his older brother's arms encircling him before he felt something inside him disappear. Izuku Midoriya's heart was racing as he stumbled back against the wall, his breaths coming in short gasps. His eyes widened in shock and fear as he stared unblinking at the figure standing nonchalantly in his room. How had the man gotten in? The lock on his front door was still secure. His mind raced with questions and possibilities, but he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that washed over him like a cold wave. He had just come back from the doctor's office, where he had been told that he would never have a quirk. Tears still stained his red t-shirt, a reminder of the crushing disappointment and hopelessness he had felt. And now this. An unknown person, or perhaps something else entirely, stood before him, its skull-like face and war bonnet adorned with feathers and a purple jewel seeming to mock his lack of power. It wore yellow robes with red roses on its chest, and gray armor on its arms and legs. For a moment, Izuku couldn't move, couldn't even find his voice. As his mother, Inko Midoriya, approached his room, her heart quickened with worry. She was a slender woman with the same vibrant green hair in a neat ponytail, and she had been anxious about her son ever since she learned he was quirkless. But the utter silence coming from his room was even more alarming. When she pushed open the door, her heart broke into a million pieces. There was her beautiful, kind son, trembling on the ground with terror etched on his face, his body pressed tightly against the wall. Without hesitation, she rushed towards him, dropping to her knees and enveloping him in a tight hug. But he didn't respond, didn't hug her back. He was still staring unblinkingly, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Tears streamed down her face as she repeated, "I'm so sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry." She didn't know what had happened to her son, but she knew that something had broken him. The entity kept his grin on his face, his vibrant green eyes clashing with Izuku's own, as if daring him to do something. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine, his heart racing as he tried to back away, but found himself frozen in place. The entity seemed to be enjoying his fear, relishing in it as it continued to stare him down. "Go away," was all Izuku could repeat in his head, his voice trembling with each syllable. He could feel the sweat beading on his forehead, his palms slick with it as he tried to find a way to escape this terrifying situation. But by some unknown miracle, the entity suddenly vanished into thin air, leaving Izuku alone with his mother who hadn't stopped crying since she found him. Her tears were like raindrops on his skin, her sobs echoing in his ears as she held him tight, apologizing over and over again. And finally, after holding it in for so long, Izuku cried with her, letting out all the fear and pain that had been building up inside of him. It was only in the next morning that Izuku knew he wasn't dreaming about the events of last night, of the entire day. He had hoped that it was just a nightmare, but the reality was just as bleak as before. He was quirkless, there was no way to make it not sound like an insult. Like he was a handicapped person. His strength seemed to leave him as he remained in his bed, knuckles gripping his bed sheets hard. Yesterday he felt utter despair and hopelessness in his eyes. Now, the only thing that he felt was sadness and an eerie emptiness. Collecting all his positive energy and summoning his determination, he sat up in his bed, ready to face another day. But as soon as his eyes scanned the room, he immediately froze, regretting ever waking up. The thing was there again, across his bed. Right at the door. Staring at him. This time, Izuku didn't feel fear as much, still enough to freeze him, as he felt a burning curiosity. He had so many questions that he wanted to ask, but his mouth was dry and his throat was tight. He took a deep breath and managed to croak out, Who are you? Why are you here? The figure stood there, unmoving and unresponsive to Izuku's presence. Even when his all-might alarm began blaring across the room, the figure remained motionless, making no attempt to silence the obnoxious noise. A foolish thought crossed Izuku's mind, and he couldn't help but voice it aloud. Excuse me, could you maybe?" he trailed off, pointing towards the blaring alarm. He immediately regretted his words. What was he thinking? There was a strange man in his room, the same one who had been there the day before, and here he was trying to make small talk. Izuku chided himself for his sudden urge to socialize, especially with someone who seemed so ominous and menacing. To Izuku's utter surprise, the man swiftly and silently moved in front of the blaring All Might alarm, silencing it with one bony finger. Izuku gulped, the man's back exposed to him. He tried to distract himself by observing the man's unusual choice of clothing. Were those sewn on music notes and real feathers? Desperate for the man to do anything besides stand there, Izuku heard footsteps approaching. Before he could say anything, his mother burst into the room. "Izuku, at this rate you're going to be late for dash." She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening at the sight of her son's terrified expression. Her heart sank, and she could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't have to go today, Izuku. Just rest for a while," she said softly, before closing the door and walking away, her footsteps fading into silence. Izuku stared at the closed door for a long moment, his mouth hanging open in shock. How had his mother not noticed the tall, strange man standing in the room with them? He turned back to the man, his fear growing stronger. With a shaking hand, he grabbed one of his notebooks from his nightstand and threw it at the figure. To his horror, the book simply phased right through the man's body, knocking the alarm clock off the desk in the process. Izuku felt his panic intensify, wishing the man once again vanished like last night. And just like last night, although now less obscured by the darkness, the man became translucent in a matter of milliseconds. In a sudden rush of terror, the man's translucent form flew towards him. Izuku let out a shrill scream, shielding his face with his elbow as if that would make the apparition disappear. After what felt like an eternity, he opened his eyes again. The man had vanished just as quickly as he appeared, leaving Izuku feeling both relieved and uneasy. He slowly climbed out of bed, taking care to scan his room for any sign of the mysterious figure. There was nothing. He let out a long exhale, relieved to be alone again. Approaching his alarm clock, he picked it up and checked it for any damage, relieved to find that it was still functioning properly. But the encounter with the strange man left Izuku with more questions than answers. What did he want? And why was he haunting him? And before he could try to answer any of these questions, footsteps once again reminded him of the other person in his home. His door opened and a worried head of a mother peeked in, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. Upon finding her son, she spoke with a gentle tone, "Izuku, come on, let's go eat breakfast." Izuku slowly nodded, his mind still reeling from the strange encounter he had just experienced. As he dressed himself and prepared to leave the room, he couldn't help but cast a nervous glance over his shoulder. The room was empty, but the feeling of unease lingered. Izuku took a deep breath and closed the door behind him, locking it with trembling fingers. As he walked down the hallway towards the kitchen, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It had been months since the strange man appeared in Izuku's room, and the experience had taken a toll on him. Not only did he have to deal with the constant fear of the man's presence, but he also had to endure the bullying of the other kids in his kindergarten. Katsuki Bakugu, the hot-headed boy from Izuku's kindergarten group, was the worst of them all. He taunted Izuku for his quirklessness, making him the laughingstock of the class. Despite this, Izuku was grateful that Katsuki at least talked to him, unlike the other kids who completely shunned him. One day, while on a walk in the forest, Katsuki slipped on a log and fell into the river. Izuku, trying to be helpful, offered his hand to help him up. But Katsuki, in a fit of anger, slapped Izuku's hand away and insulted him for his quirklessness before storming off with the other kids. Izuku stood in the cold river for what felt like an eternity, his feet freezing in the icy water. It wasn't until his mother's panicked shouts broke through his daze that he realized how long he had been standing there. He had developed a high fever that lasted for days, with doctors amazed at how severe it was considering the circumstances. The experience left Izuku feeling more isolated than ever, his physical and emotional pain too much to bear. It didn't help that Izuku spent most of his days in the sterile hospital room, hooked up to various machines that beeped and whirred, monitoring his every breath and heartbeat. The rhythmic sound of the machines had become a sort of background noise to Izuku, but it was a constant reminder of just how fragile his body was. But then there was the man, the mysterious figure that had been haunting him since his visit to the doctor. At first, the sight of him had sent Izuku into a panic, but over time, his fear had turned into a strange sort of comfort. It was as if the man was there to take care of him, to watch over him while he slept and make sure he had everything he needed. Izuku couldn't explain how or why, but he felt like he could trust the man. And so, as the days stretched on and Izuku's condition slowly improved, he found himself talking to the man more and more. At first, it was just simple things, asking for water or a blanket, but soon enough, Izuku found himself confiding in the man, telling him about his fears and worries, his hopes and dreams. To his surprise, the man listened. Not with his ears, of course, he didn't even have those, but with his eyes, which seemed to sparkle with a strange sort of understanding. As Izuku talked, he began to realize that the man was more than just a figment of his imagination. There was something deeper there, something that connected them in a way that he couldn't quite explain. And so, as he lay there in his hospital bed, surrounded by machines and sterile walls, Izuku found solace in the company of the man. It was a strange comfort, but it was one that he clung to fiercely, knowing that without it, he would be truly alone. It didn't matter that the man didn't speak back, or even have a mouth to speak with. Izuku found comfort in the fact that he could confide in someone, even if that someone was a skeletal figure with glowing eyes. As he talked, he began to feel like the man was listening, really listening. He began to notice subtle nods and gestures that seemed to indicate understanding, and it made him feel less alone. Over time, Izuku's conversations with the man grew more meaningful. He began to talk about his hopes and dreams for the future, about the things he wanted to do when he finally got out of the hospital. It was a strange, almost surreal experience, but it made Izuku feel like he had a friend, someone who truly cared about him. And as he slowly recovered from his illness, Izuku found himself looking forward to the moments when the man would come to visit. It was a strange sort of companionship, but it was one that had gotten him through some of the darkest days of his life. If it weren't for the times the man had physically interacted with the environment around him, Izuku would have thought that his mind finally snapped and conjured an extension of his psyche to deal with the isolation he had experienced for the last few days. But the man's actions were too real, too tangible, to be a mere figment of his imagination. As Izuku lay in his bed, he watched as the man moved about the room, retrieving a water bottle and fixing his blanket. It was like the man had become his own personal caretaker, always there to attend to his every need. But what was even more strange was the fact that no one seemed to notice the man's presence. Not the nurses or doctors, not even his own mother when she came to visit. It was as if he was invisible to everyone but Izuku. As the days passed, Izuku's condition slowly improved. His fever had subsided, and he was finally able to sit up and move around. And yet, even as he got better, the man's presence never wavered. He was still there, always watching, always listening. It was then that Izuku realized that the man was more than just a caretaker. He was a friend, a companion in his time of need. And even as he prepared to leave the sterile hospital room and return to the outside world, Izuku knew that he would never forget the strange, skull-faced man who had helped him through his darkest days. As life went on, he had learned to accept his quirklessness, having long given up the hope that it was just a late manifestation. He decided to attend a public school and his first interaction with his peers went smoothly. However, things took a turn for the worse when the teacher asked everyone to introduce themselves. As it came time for him to speak, he mustered up the courage to share that he had no quirk, hoping to be met with understanding and friendliness. Unfortunately, as soon as the words left his mouth, hushed whispers and snickers erupted among the students. The teacher quickly silenced them and gestured for the next person to introduce themselves. During lunch break, he soon realized that the once friendly students now wanted nothing to do with him. They either ignored his attempts at conversation, left the table when he sat down, or even snapped at him outright. It was a harsh reality that he was now facing, one that made him feel even more isolated and alone. In the next few days, things didn't seem to improve for him at school, but his outlook on the situation did. He no longer expected anyone to sit with him during lunch or for the teachers to intervene on his behalf during disturbances. He also prepared himself mentally for sports games, where he was often accidentally hit during play. After a full week of school, he came home and let out a deep sigh, closing the door to his room behind him. As he began to open his school bag to start his homework, a strange noise caught his attention. Looking up, he saw the man, his grin and eyeless feature as present as it was in the hospital. His heart skipped a beat as a small smile spread across Izuku's face. Hey there. I'm sorry for not talking in a while. And not that I don't want you here, I don't even know where you come from or how to contact you since you don't even have a phone. But I'm really happy to see you again. Izuku continued to chatter away, talking about anything and everything as he unpacked his school supplies and began his homework. Despite the challenges he was facing at school, this unexpected visit brought him a sense of comfort and ease, even if it did leave him a bit flustered. The man continued to stand by Izuku's side, silently helping him with small tasks like retrieving a book out of reach or pouring him a glass of water. After Izuku had finished his homework, he delved into his hobby of analyzing heroes and their quirks, passionately rambling on about quirks. Furiously scribbling away in a fresh notebook labeled, Hero Analysis for the Future, he wrote down every detail about quirks that caught his attention. At the moment, he was studying an Italian hero with the ability to communicate with animals and use them as companions in battle. Meanwhile, the man simply stood and observed, occasionally glancing over Izuku's shoulder but otherwise remaining motionless. When Izuku's mother entered the room to check on him, she found him sound asleep with the notebook still open on his desk and the lamp casting a soft glow on his green hair. She couldn't help but chuckle at her son's dedication and picked him up, carrying him to his bed and tucking him in with his blankets. As she closed the door, she didn't notice the blankets shifting on their own before settling into a more comfortable position for Izuku, who let out a contented sigh in his sleep. As the weeks turned into months, the man hardly left Izuku's side, and the young boy was grateful for his company. He didn't care if the man was just a figment of his imagination or a hallucination. He was just happy to have a friend. However, people around him began to notice his tendency to talk to himself. Kids at school started saying that he had mentally snapped, and teachers even addressed the problem with his mother. Izuku tried to reduce the amount of times he talked to Grim, as he called the man, as much as possible. Despite this, he continued to work diligently on his schoolwork and became the top student in his class. This infuriated Katsuki, who started bullying him. It started with verbal insults, but then things turned physical. The first time Katsuki attacked Izuku behind the school, something drastically changed. "Deku, you fing nerd!" Katsuki shouted before pulling his fist back. As he was about to hit the young boy, something stopped him. Katsuki looked down at his fist, which was mid-air, and felt a larger hand pressing against his lower arm with considerable force, making his arm shake. Izuku locked up in shock, but he didn't feel any pain. He saw that Grim was stopping Katsuki's fist with one hand. Katsuki growled angrily, "Deku, if you don't turn your fing quirk off, I will use my own." But that, it's... Stop it. Izuku yelled out to Grim, but he was ignored. In the deepest, darkest part of his subconscious, he didn't want Grim to stop gripping his arm. He would rather have him keep him safe. Katsuki, thinking the scream was addressed to him, only saw more red. "So finally growing a DMN spine are we?" "It's too late for that," he shouted, sparking a small flame in his hand before it exploded with his sweat. Izuku flinched and tried to jump back, his mind racing with fear. "Please don't let it hit me," he thought desperately. To his surprise, he found himself hurtling backward through the air, flying a distance of at least 14 meters before crashing to the ground. What?" he exclaimed, dazed and confused. Izuku looked around, searching for Grim, but the mysterious presence was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a big blue boing sound effect located where he had been standing just moments before. He couldn't believe what had just happened, and his mind reeled with disbelief and confusion. "What the hell did you just do, Deku?" Katsuki asked, his voice surprisingly calm compared to his usual explosive anger. Izuku was taken aback by the change in tone. I don't know." Izuku stammered, still in shock from the sudden burst of power. Katsuki's temper flared once again. "What do you mean, you don't know? You think I believe this sheet?" Izuku backed away from Katsuki, his hands up in defense. "I swear, I don't know." A lot of shouting later, an ominous threat from Katsuki and Izuku was walking back home again. Mid-walk, he heard the all-too-familiar sound of Grim appearing. He quickly looked up just to make sure, but equally quickly looked down again. After a long pause, Izuku finally mustered up the courage to speak. Grim. Did you make me jump back there?" To avoid the threat, he asked, turning to where Grim was standing. There was no response, and Izuku wasn't surprised. Grim never spoke, and even when he did communicate, most of the time just flashing his eyes more, it was usually so cryptic that Izuku struggled to understand. Still, he couldn't help feeling grateful to Grim. If it weren't for him, Izuku might have been hurt by Katsuki's outburst. "Thank you," he said softly, "for protecting me. I don't know what I'd do without you." Again, there was no response, but Izuku didn't mind. He didn't continue their conversation after that, simply enjoying the company. Before he knew it, he stood in front of his door already. "I'm home." As soon as Izuku stepped into his home, he felt the weight of the day lift off his shoulders. He let out a deep sigh of relief and walked towards the kitchen, where he heard his mother shuffling around. Izuku. Dinner is almost ready? Are you all right?" Inko asked, noticing her son's downcast expression. Izuku's forced smile faltered for a moment before he quickly regained his composure. "Yeah, I'm fine, Mom. Just had a tough day at school," he replied, trying to sound convincing. Inko gave him a concerned look but didn't press any further. "Okay, well, dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Take your time and freshen up if you need to," she said before turning back to the dinner. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and quickly made his way to his room. Once inside, he closed the door behind him and leaned his back against it. Izuku let out a heavy sigh and slumped onto his bed. He pulled out a familiar notebook from his backpack, the only difference being a new #2 hashtag at the end of the title. As he flipped through the pages, his mind was still preoccupied with the events of the day. "You never told me about your quirk," he said, turning towards Grim. "I always assumed it was your appearance and your invisibility." He rubbed his neck, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I've known you for months now, and I'm still not sure if you really exist. I mean, I know you can interact with the environment and all, but why can't anyone else see you?" Grim remained silent, as he always did. Izuku sighed again, knowing he wouldn't get a response. He looked around his room, taking in the familiar surroundings. It was his sanctuary, the one place where he could be himself without fear of judgment. But even here, he couldn't escape the constant nagging of his quirklessness. It was a constant reminder of his limitations, of the things he could never achieve. He opened his notebook and began jotting down some ideas, hoping to distract himself from his thoughts. "I wish I could show everyone that I have something to offer," he muttered to himself. Most people he told he was quirkless would simply nod and turn away after. But those who he interacted with for longer periods of time would notice the strange occurrences around him, pens writing on their own, objects flying towards him, and doors opening and closing seemingly on their own accord. Izuku didn't think much of it, because all he could see was Grim doing these things, not him. It wasn't until now that he realized Grim always seemed to know what he wanted before he even said anything. It was as if his ghostly companion could read his mind. This ability made it seem like Izuku had a telekinesis quirk, similar to his mother's. But he knew the truth, Grim was the source of these peculiar happenings. Whenever Izuku was confronted about the strange things happening around him, he would always explain that it was his invisible friend who had the ability, not him. But the more he talked about Grim, the more people began to avoid him. It wasn't until he spoke to his mother about Grim, which turned out to be an adventure in itself, that she suggested they go back to the doctor and update his registry to list telekinesis as his quirk. Izuku learned to keep his quirklessness and Grim a secret from others, as he was constantly met with skepticism and ridicule. His classmates continued to call him crazy and insane, while even his teacher seemed to distance himself from Izuku. It became easier for him to accept their misunderstanding rather than trying to explain the truth to them. He looked up, catching Grim looking over his shoulder. Can you do that again?" he asked, eyes widening with curiosity. Grim walked towards a cup on Izuku's desk, one that he had forgotten to clean, and picked it up. He stared at it for a few seconds, as if considering something, before violently throwing it to the ground. The resulting sound was a loud slam that should have destroyed the cup beyond any hope of repair. As Izuku quickly tried to come up with an excuse for the loud noise, he heard his mother's voice calling out from behind the door. "Is everything okay, Izuku?" she asked with concern. Taking a deep breath, Izuku replied with a forced calmness, "Yeah, Mom. I just tripped over a cup, but everything's fine." After he heard his mother's footsteps recede, he turned back to Grim, who had picked up the cup again. But this time, as Grim picked up the cup, Izuku noticed a small green kana stuck to it. Grim lazily threw the cup at Izuku's alarm, and everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Izuku watched as the cup slowly descended towards the clock, the green kana still attached to it. The impact was immediate and devastating. The glass face of the clock shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, sending sharp fragments flying in every direction. The small plastic All Might figure perched on top of the alarm was flung to the ground, its limbs breaking off on impact. The protective plastic case housing the delicate interior folded in on itself as if it had been crushed by a powerful force. Izuku was left in utter shock, his mind racing with a million questions. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His alarm clock, which had been with him for years, was now a pile of broken pieces. But he couldn't bring himself to be angry or upset about it, not when he had just witnessed Grim's power firsthand. He turned to Grim, who was still standing there, seemingly unaffected by the chaos he had just caused. Izuku's eyes were wide with wonder and amazement as he studied his invisible friend. He couldn't believe that all this time, Grim had been hiding such a powerful ability. He looked back at the destroyed alarm clock, then back at Grim. This went on for a few moments until he finally turned back to his notebook, determined to document Grim's quirk. He flipped open a brand new blank page and began to jot down his thoughts. "Force manipulation," he wrote. "No, probably storage. That makes more sense. Does he need to throw the object, or does any force suffice? Can force be already stored in an object?" He paused for a moment, considering these questions before continuing to write. Does Grim have control over the stored force? Can he release it at will, or does it happen automatically? And if it happens automatically, what triggers it? Izuku's mind was buzzing with theories and ideas, and he scribbled them down as fast as he could. What about the green kana, he mused. Does it have any significance, or was it just a coincidence? He only stopped writing when his mother bursted through his door, yelling for the 5th time that dinner was ready. Izuku Midoriya could hardly contain his excitement as he sat on the old, rusty fridge. His heart was pounding with anticipation, his body shaking with the sheer thrill of it all. The smell of rotting garbage filled his nostrils, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the power he was witnessing. He looked around at the piles of broken electrical devices and other debris that surrounded him. It was a scene of chaos and destruction. Takoba Beach was really disgusting, but it was also the perfect place to witness Grimm's incredible quirk. Izuku's mind raced with excitement as he scribbled down more entries on Grimm's page in his notebook. Grimm's power was not about storing physical force, but sounds. This was a game changer, and Izuku could barely contain his excitement. He had always been fascinated by quirks and their potential, but Grimm's ability was on another level. It was versatile, practical, and had endless possibilities. Izuku couldn't wait to see what other surprises Grimm had in store for him. He glanced over at Grimm, who was standing next to him, invisible as always. He wondered what it would be like to have such a powerful quirk and what it would be like to use it. But for now, he was content to study and learn all he could about Grimm's ability. Grimm's quirk, sound storage, was truly remarkable. Izuku couldn't believe the possibilities that came with such an ability. He marveled at Grimm's power, which was able to store any sound in an object and apply it to other things with the physical manifestation of the sounds, represented by the kanzas on the objects. The implications of this quirk were astounding. It meant that Grimm could create a weapon out of any object by simply applying the sound of an explosion or a gunshot. But, like all quirks, it had its limitations. The only downside was that Grimm had to be near the sound or create it himself. He couldn't create a sound out of nothing. However, he could still store sounds in objects if they were made in his radius by someone else. That was still pretty impressive. As Izuku scribbled away happily in his notebook, he didn't even spare a second glance at the chaos around him. The floor was littered with the broken remains of microwaves and other small appliances, all sacrificed in the name of his necessary research. He was so absorbed in his theories that he barely even noticed Grimm strolling past with another microwave in hand, poised to smash it against the stairs. He didn't notice the plain blonde boy watching him from the streets, studying him curiously from afar. The boy looked both ways before crossing the street, then walked down the stairs. It wasn't until Izuku heard a loud, jarring smashing sound that he finally snapped out of his research-induced trance. His head swiveled around, searching for the source of the noise. That's when he saw the blonde boy, lying on the ground and groaning in pain. Izuku didn't waste any time. He jumped off the fridge, hastily stowing his precious notebooks away, and sprinted towards the injured boy. As he got closer, he noticed something peculiar, a tail protruding from the boy's back. The blonde boy was of a similar age to Izuku. His short hair was swept forward, and he wore a plain gray shirt, black shorts, and white sneakers. Izuku knelt down beside him, apologizing profusely as he tended to the boy's injuries. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know someone else was here. Are you okay? Do you need an ambulance? Is your back hurt? Are you okay?" Izuku's words came pouring out of his mouth without stopping. Until the boy slowly sat up again, letting out a groan before turning to him and saying, "Don't worry, I'm fine, man. It doesn't really hurt anymore." Masahiro Ojiro winced as a slight pinch spread through his back. "Although I'm surprised that it hurts more than when I usually fall." Quickly, Izuku put his arms up again, tears forming in his eyes. "That's my fault. If I wasn't so careless you wouldn't be injured. I am so sorry." His tears started to flow down his cheeks, causing Masahiro to feel a bit put off. Hey. It's all right. Here, see." Masahiro stood up without any hesitation, holding out his hand to help Izuku up. "I'm really fine. Masahiro Ojiro," he said, introducing himself. Izuku hesitated for a moment before accepting the offer and standing up. "Izuku Midoriya," he mumbled quietly, still wiping away his tears. As Ojiro walked around, taking in the destruction around them, he turned to Izuku and asked, "So Midoriya, what are you up to?" Izuku froze, feeling caught off guard. He had never expected someone to catch him in the act, let alone someone as strong-looking as Ojiro. I was just experimenting," he stumbled, not quite sure how to explain himself. Ojiro let out an impressed whistle. "With your quirk?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Izuku hesitated. "No, my quirk," he finally admitted. Ojiro chuckled. "Did you use your quirk to break all these things, or did you do it the old-fashioned way with your fists?" he joked. Izuku blushed, realizing how silly he must have looked punching a microwave. No, it was my quirk, he replied, feeling embarrassed. Ojiro nodded, understanding, that's pretty cool. What does your quirk do, exactly? This was the longest he had a normal conversation with someone that wasn't his mother probably. He really didn't want to lie, really he didn't. He heard the cranking sound again, Grim appearing next to Ojiro who was patiently waiting for him to finish. One look at Grim, his eyes flashing brighter than usual, and he steeled his nerves. Sound storage. Grim's light lit up once again, this time brighter, before reappearing beside Izuku, not catching Ojiro's attention. Sounds cool, at least cooler than tailed. Ojiro sighed, not noticing Izuku's sudden change in demeanor. That's not true, the quirk might be simple, but you can do so much with it. How much can you lift with it, how well can you control it, how durable is your tail? Izuku continued his chatter without looking Ojiro in the eye, took out his notebooks again and began to write intensely. Ojiro was taken aback and remained in stunned silence for a few moments, watching as the boy continued his rapid-fire speech without pausing for a full 20 seconds. It seemed as though he hadn't even stopped to take a breath. Another 20 seconds went by and Izuku was still talking, which now greatly worried Ojiro. Without realizing it, he attempted to interrupt the boy. Hey, he said, snapping his fingers in front of Izuku's eyes and attempting to block his view with his hands. But it was as if Izuku wasn't really looking at his notebook, his hands automatically moving to keep up with his speech. Ojiro then took hold of Izuku's hands, attempting to prevent him from continuing to write. Izuku's head shot up, realizing how long he had been talking. He blushed in embarrassment as he apologized to Ojiro. I'm sorry, I mumbled again, didn't I? It's just that quirks fascinate me so much and I can't help but talk about them, he explained. Ojiro chuckled and reassured him, no worries, man. I was just afraid you'd pass out from lack of oxygen, the way you were talking nonstop. Izuku couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh. Yeah, I tend to get carried away sometimes, he admitted. Ojiro's gaze then shifted towards the notes Izuku had written. So, what did you write about? He asked curiously. Oh, those are just some ideas I had about things you could do with your quirk. But since I don't have all the information, they're probably just wild guesses, Izuku explained, his voice trailing off as he became more uncertain. He had never been asked by someone his age about his notes on their quirks before. As he listed off his theories, Ojiro looked at him with a puzzled expression. Spinning. Catapult. Flight, he repeated, his tone questioning. Izuku's face turned red with embarrassment. I thought maybe you could spin your tail so fast that you could take off, he muttered, avoiding Ojiro's gaze. Ojiro stared at him for a moment before his expression suddenly broke into a smile and then a laugh. Like Tails from Sonic, he exclaimed, amused by the thought. Izuku's blush deepened. Not exactly what I had in mind, but yeah, something like that, he admitted, feeling foolish. He continued to chuckle. Can you imagine me flying with my tail spinning like a propeller? He said, still laughing. But when he noticed Izuku's downcast expression, he immediately sobered up. Hey, is everything okay? He asked, concerned. Izuku hesitated for a moment before blurting out, I'm sorry, I'm late for dinner, and then quickly ran away, leaving Ojiro alone on the beach. Was it something I said? After spending several days cooped up in his house, Izuku's thirst for knowledge became unquenchable. Even after his mother discovered all the broken cups in his room and forbade him from conducting experiments, he couldn't resist his curiosity. With shaky knees, he returned to the beach, choosing a different spot to avoid running into anyone. He scanned the area to ensure he was alone before taking out his notebook once more. But just as he began to write, he heard the familiar sound of Grim's emergence. Despite sensing his presence, Izuku looked up to see Grim standing beside him. His gaze remained fixed on Grim, unsure and hesitant. Izuku's mind was racing, unsure of what to make of the situation. It felt like something was off, buried deep in his thoughts and only now surfacing. With a calm mind, he couldn't help but ponder over how peculiar Grim truly was. While his appearance could be attributed to his quirk, Izuku had seen many individuals, including heroes, with mutations that didn't add anything to their abilities. It was everything else about Grim that fascinated him. He was an ever-present companion, appearing out of thin air in places he shouldn't even know about, but always by Izuku's side. No one else could see him, and he possessed a second quirk that was vastly different from his first, leading Izuku to question whether it was truly a dual quirk at all. Dual quirks typically had some connection or similarity, yet sound storage, invisibility, and warping, an incredibly advanced form of it, seemed unrelated. Izuku couldn't fathom how it was possible without causing biological chaos, and it remained an enigma to him. Not to mention his ability to apparently read minds, at least Izuku's thoughts. How else could it be explained that Grim knew what Izuku was up to with him? Every time he wanted something, Grim would get it for him without him having to say anything. Every request he made of him, he dutifully fulfilled. This made Izuku think, and a dark chasm formed in his stomach. Raise your left arm, was what he wanted. It wasn't thought out loud or in his head, it was like he was moving a third appendage. Ojiro would probably approve of that metaphor. Grim raised his left arm. Izuku's dark stomach pit grew. Go. Grim walked. No. I am Izuku Midoriya, he said. But not out of his own mouth. Grim's mouth moved for him, the sound came from his throat. Tears formed in his eyes and Izuku Midoriya wept. Go away. Grim flew towards him again like that night. He now knows why. In a silent way. Izuku mused absent-mindedly during his math class. His quirk was always present, but in a silent way. Grim wasn't a separate entity watching over him. Grim was Izuku. It was his own quirk. He should have been overjoyed to have a quirk that could potentially make him a hero, but instead, Izuku felt a profound sense of emptiness. His only companion was himself, always. No wonder people would call him insane or crazy. The lessons finished, school was over, he was essentially talking to himself. He walked without thinking, not that they ever thought of something else, but Izuku at least always thought he was talking to someone who was real. His nose picked up an unpleasant stench, but he ignored it. He didn't care if he was just a fragment of his psyche, his earlier statements going through his mind. He knew it was different thinking about a scenario and having the scenario played out. And yet, he couldn't be less surprised as someone who didn't know. Even with shoes on, he felt the sand beneath him and he didn't know how to proceed. What should he do now? He had been given a quirk, his mental health had been badly affected and he had lost his only friend. A sigh escaped his mouth. Midoriya, a voice asked from behind, a familiar voice. Izuku immediately tensed and looked around. Takoba Beach. How did he get here? He turned quickly and found himself facing Ojiro again. Only this time he was wearing a green shirt and blue shorts with red shoes. Hey, do you remember me? I'm Ojiro, he greeted Izuku with an uncertain smile, pointing to himself with his thumb. Izuku, standing tensely, nodded quickly in recognition. Good to see you, Ojiro rambled, unsure how to continue the conversation. As they stood there in silence, Izuku could sense that Ojiro was thinking about something, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was. He felt a sense of unease, desperate to escape the situation without offending him. He searched for a way to politely excuse himself, hoping to leave without causing any harm. Ojiro began hesitantly, listen, about last time. I'm sorry. His words trailed off lamely, leaving Izuku looking confused and unsure of what to say. Huh? Izuku responded, his posture slacking. You just took off like that, with a lame apology at that. It was probably something I said, right? Ojiro asked, now even more uncertain than before. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. And no, it wasn't your fault. Izuku replied quickly, trying to reason. I just thought I don't know. Izuku's mouth closed again, unsure of how to answer. Why you see, he said, his voice trembling. It was my fault. Izuku quickly shook his head. No, he replied, his voice even more heated. He slumped back down, looking meek and defeated, gazing at the sand. The tension between them was palpable, and both teens were unsure how to proceed. But then Izuku took a deep breath and whispered, have you ever been lied to so well that after it turned out to be a lie, your whole world shattered? Ojiro listened carefully, his expression growing more concerned. Not really, he said uncertainly. What exactly do you mean? Izuku stammered, struggling to put his thoughts into words. Well, your quirk, for one, he said, his voice rising in frustration. What if one day it turned out you didn't have a tail as a quirk? What if you actually had wings, and the tail was only there because you were still growing into them? He trailed off, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. What would you do then? He finished lamely. The boy with the tail appeared perplexed, scratching his cheeks thoughtfully as his tail rested on his left shoulder. Well, he began, first of all, I'd be devastated. Taily and I have been inseparable since the day I was born. Losing it, no matter what I get in return, would destroy me, he said firmly, chuckling at the nickname he had given to his tail. Izuku looked down, anticipating this answer. But then, I suppose I would try out my new wings, he continued, looking up with a smile. I mean, at least I would get something in return, he said, gazing up at the sky where a few seagulls were soaring. And hey, flying doesn't seem so bad, right? He looked back at Izuku, who stared at him in awe. Why yes, it doesn't sound so bad, Izuku muttered, still amazed by the boy's positive outlook. Ojiro frowned, concerned at the teenager's somber tone. Did something like that happen to you? Izuku averted his eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. Silence returned once more. Hey, a new Italian restaurant opened up a few streets away. He gestured behind him and Izuku looked up, surprised by the sudden change of topic. Would you like to go there with me next Saturday? Ojiro asked, his tone hopeful but unsure. Izuku's mind whirled. Had he just been asked to do something with him? Something like a friendship thing? He was so surprised that he didn't answer for a few seconds, which made Ojiro uncomfortable with the renewed silence. You don't have to if you don't want to, he quickly added, backpedaling. But before he could say more, Izuku blurted out, No, I will. His face flushed with embarrassment, but he couldn't help the smile that crept across his lips. Ojiro fell silent before a smile spread across his face. Great, next Saturday then. Izuku nodded. Looking forward to it, he hollered as he ascended the stairs and waved goodbye. Why yes. Izuku watched as Ojiro walked a few feet before stopping and sprinting back. I almost forgot, we should probably exchange numbers, he muttered, chuckling. Oh, okay. A few minutes later, as Ojiro disappeared into the horizon, Izuku watched him go before turning his gaze to the sea. Despite the rubbish surrounding him, he took a deep breath of salty air and closed his eyes. The sound of seagulls made him lift his head to the sky and a small smile spread across his lips. Yeah, he finally said to himself, flying doesn't sound so bad. Izuku's hands twitched anxiously as he sat in the cramped waiting room of the Quirk admissions office. He glanced around, taking in the sterile environment, the white leather sofa, polished to a high shine, situated on the opposite side of the room, a poster of a fluffy kitten hung next to the entrance he had just walked through. The faint scent of deodorant wafted from a person sitting a few chairs down. The room seemed frozen in time, unchanged since Izuku's last visit 2 years prior. Third time's the charm, huh? He silently asked himself. He couldn't help but feel a little discouraged, but he reminded himself that he wasn't alone. Most people only had to come in twice. The first time was to register their quirk, and the second was to update its name after discovering more about it. It was all for the sake of the government's database, which required accurate information on all registered quirks. Izuku's mother's heart was pounding in her chest as she sat beside her son, her anxiety palpable. She had been surprised and relieved when her son had confided in her about Grim, thankful that her son wasn't imagining things or making friends with someone she couldn't see. But as he talked about his theory of discovering his true quirk, her worry grew. And now, learning that Grim was his quirk all along, a quirk that didn't match their family's or his father's, her heart sank with fear and concern for her son's well-being. She glanced over at him and noticed he was once again scribbling in his notebook. He often returned home with a pained expression and attempted to force a smile, but it was obvious he was struggling. She didn't want to intrude on his privacy, so she refrained from asking too many questions. Occasionally, however, when her concern became too great, she would take a quick glance or listen in on his murmurs as he talked about the mysterious man and his peculiar quirk. It was evident to her that having someone made him incredibly happy, but it also saddened her to see that he was so broken that his only companion was himself. Izuku was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't notice his mother's concerned expression. He was staring at the list of potential names for his quirk, lost in deep contemplation. He couldn't settle for just any name. Telekinesis wasn't only wrong, it didn't even begin to capture the full extent of his power. He knew that sound storage was a more fitting name, but even that fell short of encompassing the entirety of his abilities, especially the peculiar Grim. After a metallic sound, Grim appeared on Izuku's left side, facing forward. Izuku gazed at the apparition, longing for it to turn and face him. It was still strange to him that he had never realized how effortless it was to control Grim. The ease of it all amazed him, like breathing or walking, and yet Grim still seemed to have some form of independence from him. This gave him a glimmer of hope, that perhaps Grim wasn't really his quirk, but another person aiding him. As he glanced over his list, a sense of disappointment washed over Izuku. He had hoped that Grim was more than just a figment of his imagination, but those hopes were fading fast. With a heavy sigh, he turned back to his notebook and began crossing out the hastily scribbled names he had brainstormed over the past few days. It was clear to him now that none of them truly captured the essence of his unique ability. He knew he needed to put more thought into it, but he was struggling to find inspiration. As he was flipping through the pages of his notebook, Izuku was startled by the gentle shaking of his left shoulder. His mother's voice sounded soft in his ear, "Izuku, it's your turn." With a start, he closed his book, stood up, and followed the secretary who held the door open for him. Izuku walked quietly behind the secretary. "This is your third time, right, Izuku?" the secretary asked without looking back. He nodded, realizing too late that she couldn't see him. "Why yes," he stuttered, speaking a bit louder than intended. The secretary let out a small sigh before stopping in front of the familiar blue door and opening it. "Let's hope this is the last time, huh?" she said, forcing a polite smile. Izuku stared at her for a moment before quickly entering the room. The office room they entered was well lit by natural light streaming in from a large window on the left side. The walls were painted in a calming shade of blue and adorned with motivational posters and certificates. The room was relatively small, with only a desk, a few chairs, and a filing cabinet taking up most of the space. The desk was cluttered with papers and files, with a computer monitor and keyboard pushed off to the side. The air in the room was a bit stuffy, with a faint scent of cleaning products mixed with the musky smell of old paper. Overall, the room gave off a serious and professional vibe, making Izuku feel even more nervous than he already was. The door creaked open, and a tall man stepped in. He was broad-shouldered and stood with a confident posture, his head held high. He wore a well-tailored brown coat that accentuated his muscular build, and a neatly pressed white shirt peeked out from underneath. A pair of wire-rimmed gray glasses sat on his nose, giving him an intellectual air. His warm brown eyes scanned the room, and a small smile played on his lips as he spoke in a polite and friendly tone. "Izuku Midoriya?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. Izuku's face grew more confused as he tried to place the man's friendly demeanor. "All right, I'm Shishibe Dirakume, and I'll take care of changing your quirk name, Izuku," he introduced himself before walking around the desk and taking a seat in front of them. Izuku's nerves got the best of him as he hesitantly spoke up, Dirakume-san, may I ask you something?" Shishibe's lips curved into a warm smile. "Certainly, and call me Shishibe," he said in a friendly tone, his eyes glinting with kindness. "I was just wondering, where is Shojibe-san?" Izuku asked, his voice wavering slightly. Shojibe had been the one to assist him with his quirk the last 2 times he had visited, and while he wasn't the most affable person, he had treated Izuku with a certain level of respect and professionalism. Shishibe's smile faltered slightly. "Unfortunately, my colleague Shojibe is currently unavailable due to a cold, so I'll be taking care of your request today." "I hope that's not a problem," he explained, his tone apologetic. Izuku shook his head quickly. "No, not at all. I appreciate you taking the time to help me." "Excellent," Shishibe said with a nod, his smile returning. "Let's get started, then." He walked over to a cabinet and rummaged through it before returning to his desk with a file in hand. "According to your file, you were considered quirkless until you were 8, when you registered your quirk as telekinesis. Is that correct?" he asked, setting the file down. Izuku nodded in agreement. "All right, so you wish to change the name of your quirk after discovering it's different from what you initially thought?" Shishibe confirmed, leaning back in his chair. Izuku nodded again. "Well then, let's hear it. What do you want to name your quirk?" Shishibe said, his eyes lighting up with curiosity. "Should I state my quirk?" Izuku asked, sounding confused. "While that's the usual way of doing things, I don't believe it's effective. Your quirk is a lifelong companion, and if you give it a name without much thought, you may not feel a sense of ownership towards it. That's why people often choose to rename their quirks," Shishibe explained, pointing his finger towards Izuku. Izuku pondered for a moment before responding, "Okay, if that's all right with you." Shishibe chuckled, "Besides, I enjoy trying to guess my patient's quirks. It's quite amusing." Izuku nodded, his notebook already in hand. He flipped to the page with the names he had brainstormed, then answered uncertainly, "My first idea was sound storage." Shishibe stroked his chin thoughtfully. "While it does describe your main ability and gives people a basic idea of what your quirk can do you think it truly represents you?" he asked, fixing his gaze on Izuku. Izuku shifted nervously. He knew the answer was no, but he didn't want to waste any more of Shishibe's time. But Izuku hesitated before speaking. He remembered what Shishibe had said about naming his quirk half-heartedly. "Ownership. It's mine. My quirk," he thought to himself. A small, quiet sound escaped him as he called forth something deep within him. Suddenly, the translucent left arm of Grimm appeared out of his own, hovering slightly over it like a gauntlet. As he traced it up his arm, it became more and more translucent until it vanished entirely. "No, I don't think it does," Izuku finally said, meeting Shishibe's gaze with determination. Shishibe smiled knowingly before nodding in understanding. "Take your time, Izuku. There's no need to rush," Shishibe said kindly, eyeing Izuku's notebook. "Maybe I can take a look at what you wrote?" Izuku instinctively clutched his notebook tighter. He didn't trust anyone with his ideas, not even his mother, and despite Shishibe's kindness, he couldn't bring himself to hand it over. "It's okay, Izuku," Shishibe said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "We can try something else." "You must have heard the sound before," he asked, trying to find a different angle. "Huh?" Izuku looked confused, not sure where this was going. To activate your quirk, you must have heard the sound before, Shishibe explained. Oh, no, not really, Izuku replied, feeling a little confused. Shishibe paused and put on a thinking pose. So you store the sounds inside of objects, is that correct? He asked. Izuku nodded hesitantly, wondering where this was going. Shishibe leaned forward, and you can only store specific sounds, right? Izuku nodded again, feeling a little more confident. Well, I've actually only tried out a few, he admitted. Shishibe smiled encouragingly. Tell me about them. What sounds have you stored? Excitement washed over Izuku as he flipped open his notebook and began to share his discoveries with Shishibe. He eagerly recounted his experiments with the many microwaves he had found on Takoba Beach, describing in detail the different sounds he had used on them: smash, crash, boing, whoosh, and various other variations. Shishibe listened attentively, asking the occasional question for clarification, and never interrupting Izuku's flow of thought. After Izuku finished, Shishibe was quite taken aback. That's quite a quirk you've got there, Izuku. I'm impressed, he smiled. Izuku blushed heavily, not being used to the praise. Well then, do you perhaps have some obscure names? Izuku looked at the doctor in confusion. I've noticed that sometimes you interrupt your explanations and flip to another page just to scribble something away, he explained. Well those aren't really good names, he said lamely. But maybe they're good inspiration for a good name. Come on, I won't judge, he said jokingly. Izuku's left hand, which had been clutching his knee, was now fidgeting. He glanced again at one of the names he had crossed out before muttering something quietly. In a silent way. What was that? I didn't hear it, Shishibe said, leaning closer. In a silent way, repeated Izuku again, this time louder and easier to hear. Oh, how did you come up with that name? Izuku looked to the ground again and fell silent once more. Shishibe leaned back in his chair again, giving Izuku time to think. My quirk allows me to summon an invisible humanoid. It can store sounds, not me. Oh, a sentient quirk then? The doctor asked curiously. No, not really. Izuku quickly dispelled, it's semi-sentient, it knows what I want without me having to explain myself, and listens to my command. But it can't speak. But I can speak through it. Shishibe stared at Izuku for a few seconds, causing him to shift back and forth in his seat. What a unique quirk. And you say it's invisible, he asked in confirmation? Izuku nodded. Why yes, to everyone but me, it's invisible. That's why people thought I had telekinesis when I asked it to get me something and they couldn't see it. Again there was silence. Fascinating, the doctor whispered, but because of the silence in the office, Izuku could hear it. And how is it that you chose that name for it? Well. Izuku looked uncertain. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, Izuku, Shishibe quickly reassured. Izuku quickly shook his head, and no, it's fine. The reason was. Because I was diagnosed quirkless. When I first saw my quirk, I thought he was someone who protected me. Who was always there, a friend to me. The more Izuku spoke, the more conviction there was in his voice. When I spoke to it, it didn't answer. It just stared and listened. When I found out it wasn't someone else, it was my quirk. I realized it was always with me. Just in a silent way, he whispered at the end. Shishibe looked at Izuku again, and because the sounds it can store and emit are silent to everyone. It's a bit ironic that it does that. He stuttered. Shishibe continued to be silent. Izuku, Shishibe said softly, capturing the young boy's attention. Have you ever tried calling out the name of your quirk while using it? Izuku looked puzzled, and Shishibe quickly explained, in stressful situations, hostage, kidnapping and such people often call out the name of their quirk as a way to calm their mind. It's a coping mechanism for dealing with the stress for people who are not used to these kind of situations. Izuku remained calm but uncertain. Is it worth a try? He asked tentatively. Shishibe nodded. It could be helpful. Give it a shot. In a silent way. Directly behind Izuku, his full form emerged, his grin seeming to widen even more and his eyes shining with a bright light. Izuku felt a sense of exhilaration and contentment, as if he had discovered something special within himself. Well? Shishibe asked with a knowing smile. Yes. Izuku cried out. He couldn't explain it, it just felt good. Right. All right then, Shishibe said, standing up as well. I'll take care of the paperwork, it should be official tomorrow, the doctor smiled. What a fancy name. After a few more minutes, Izuku left the building, dragging his mother behind him. His quirk, he looked down at his hand, which was instead covered by a ghostly hand. He formed it into a fist and smiled. His own quirk. His own power. He could become a hero. Name. Shishibe Dirakume. Quirk. Zone out. Description. produces a low amount of unnoticeable pheromones that leave through his skin. Inhalation of these makes the affected more relaxed and in a calm state of mind the longer they are in contact with the pheromones. Izuku sat on a rusty fridge, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse of the blue sea, at least as best he could with all the rubbish in the way, and waited silently for Ojiro. Both were quite busy after their visit to the Italian restaurant. Ojiro, who was taking a martial arts class, had a tournament and Izuku renamed his quirk but decided they should do something together again. Neither were sure what to do before they agreed to just walk around the mall. His thoughts were momentarily distracted by the sound of footsteps approaching him. Looking up, he saw Ojiro making his way towards him, a small smile on his face. "Hey, Izuku," Ojiro said as he reached him. "Sorry I'm late." Izuku shook his head, his attention returning to the sea. "It's fine. I was just thinking." Ojiro followed his gaze out to the water, and his expression softened. "Yeah, it's kind of peaceful out here, isn't it?" Izuku nodded, grateful for the company. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soothing sound of the waves crashing against the shore. Eventually they departed from the trash beach, walking to the city. "How was the tournament?" "I'm sorry I couldn't be there," Izuku said nervously. It's okay," he waved his hands as if to wipe away Izuku's worries. "It was just bad luck that your appointment fell on the same day." Izuku, still feeling bad but not really wanting to argue with him, simply nodded. As they walked, a comfortable silence settled between them. They strolled through the busy streets, occasionally peering into shop windows along the way towards the station. The bustling city was alive with the sounds of people, traffic, and the occasional street performer. As they stood on the platform, waiting for their train to arrive, Ojiro turned to Izuku with a smile. "So?" he asked. "What?" asked Izuku nervously. Ojiro couldn't help but chuckle at Izuku's nervousness. He remembered the last time they were out together, Izuku had trouble even ordering for himself and had to repeat his words twice. It was a relief to see him improving, and Ojiro found the whole situation a little endearing. "Your quirk name? What is it now?" he clarified for him. "Aya." Izuku remained silent. Honestly, he didn't know why he thought that name was such a good idea. No, actually it was because deep inside he had a resonance or something similar. He just knew it, but somehow the trust he had in Shishibe was much lower, so he was almost embarrassed by the name because it was so unconventional. As he mulled over his thoughts, Ojiro noticed his friend's unease. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, his concern evident. Izuku hesitated before finally responding, "I named my quirk," in a silent way, "duh." His voice trailed off, unsure of how Ojiro would handle the situation. Izuku remained silent. But to his surprise, Ojiro's face lit up with excitement. "Dude, that's so cool," he exclaimed, causing Izuku to blink in surprise. Really?" he stammered, unsure of how to react. "Are you kidding? That's probably the coolest name I've heard for a quirk." Izuku felt a wave of relief wash over him, grateful for Ojiro's enthusiastic response. "Thanks," he replied quietly with a small smile, feeling more confident about his quirk's name. Ojiro's shoulder sagged a little. "I'd probably call it sound storage, or something simple like that." "Well, that would sum up the ability pretty well, wouldn't it?" encouraged Izuku. "Yeah, but," in a silent way, he let it roll off his tongue, "that's just so much better." The two friends continued their conversation, discussing the various quirk names of heroes and villains, laughing at some of the more ridiculous ones and sharing their personal favorites. It wasn't long before they reached the mall and took a tour, admiring the various shops and window displays. They chatted about their favorite stores and items, but eventually ran out of things to say. They fell into a comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out something interesting to each other as they strolled through the mall. As they walked, Ojiro recounted his recent martial arts tournament, his voice filled with disappointment over his defeat. Izuku listened attentively, gasping in all the right places and asking questions to show his interest. "But you made it to the final." "I probably wouldn't even make it past the first round," Izuku tried to comfort him. "Well, you have no martial arts training, no wonder," Ojiro chuckled. Still." Izuku protested with a pout, causing Ojiro to laugh nervously and blush. Eventually, they bought ice cream and sat down on a nearby bench to enjoy it. As they liked their cones, Izuku and Ojiro discussed their favorite hero and quirks, poking fun at a few of the more ridiculous ones. Time flew by quickly, and before they knew it, their phones alerted them that their train was about to arrive. They scrambled to finish their ice cream and ran through the mall to catch the train. They made it just in time, panting and laughing as they boarded. When they said their goodbyes and parted ways at the station, Izuku's face lit up with a genuine smile that stayed with him all the way home. Name: Mashireo Ojiro. Quirk. Tale. Description: He has a very flexible, durable and several times denser tail on his back that he can move instinctively. Izuku went to the beach more often than he admitted to his mother. Not because he liked it. On the contrary, he didn't really like being on that beach, but he enjoyed the privacy he had there to train with his quirk instead of using one of the many quirk training centers. Quirk training centers were supposed to be a place where you could learn to control your quirk without a license. However, the reality was that these centers often fell short. For starters, there was a monthly fee, which seemed reasonable, but it was strange that citizens had to pay to use a facility that was technically owned by the government. Izuku couldn't help but wonder about the economics behind it. Furthermore, these centers collected an alarming amount of data on their users. From the numerous forums he had read before seeing if he should sign up, it was clear that users were treated like guinea pigs. They were only allowed to experiment with their quirks if the centers approved, and some even trained small children with promising quirks to become heroes. To Izuku, this seemed too extreme to be true, and he typically ignored such statements, but still worried that still many agreed on the first part. He decided against a membership. But it wasn't as if he needed the center, he had the perfect place to train without anyone else knowing. If he broke the law somehow, no one would catch him. He looked around nervously. No one. He continued to obliterate the microwaves. He had become quite good at that with his quirk. The old-fashioned way with the fist? Ojiro's question randomly entered his head. Now that he thought about it, he could try it, couldn't he? Crunch. Izuku really concentrated on not crying. A few moments later, after he had given himself a slap in the face for this really impulsive act, he tried it again. Finding the familiar feeling only slightly compelling, he formed a ghostly fist around his own. It was only a skeletal hand, covered by a glove, but perhaps it would not hurt as much? Clank, it did. Not as much as it would have been without it, but he certainly couldn't destroy a wall or this microwave with his fist alone. Not like Ojiro, who showed the strength of his tail after much urging from Izuku. Izuku looked at the device again. 2 kanas covered it from the front, one blue, one red. He touched them and like the last time, it was squeezed, not giving much resistance as Izuku used more force in his finger to penetrate it and form around it instead. When he let go, it really was like a trampoline, releasing the energy it had stored and quickly returning to its former form. I wonder. Izuku left the sandy ground in exchange for the clean, pure concrete before taking off his shoes and throwing them on the ground. Checking, they both had blue kanas for smash on their soles. He put them back on, being careful not to let the kanas touch the ground, and used the railing to get back up on his hands, standing on his toes so as not to touch the ground. He slowly climbed up the railing, then used it to jump as high as he could into the air, landing with his shoes on the side street. A very loud cracking sound was the first thing he heard before he realized that he had fallen further to the ground. Izuku was shocked at first, before the shock turned to horror. Oh no. He was standing in a 30-centimeter deep hole he had dug himself, cracks around the hole spreading like a spider's web. He quickly climbed out of the hole and examined it from above. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks? It was definitely as bad as it looks. It was like Small Mike came through and randomly punched the ground at that spot, twice. It's probably fine. When he comes back tomorrow, it will be gone. Finally, he ran fast enough to create zoom effects that he applied to the soles of his shoes, making him faster and the newly created zoom effects even stronger. The next day it was still there. Izuku started to panic. This was bad, very bad. He wished it was just a dream. Just a dream in which he had accidentally committed property damage. No, wait, it actually belongs to the state. Does that still count? Probably, not that he wouldn't be just as freaked out if it didn't. He nervously bounced around the hole, patting himself every now and then to make sure it was very much real. Well, he could at least make sure no one fell in? Yes, that sounded like a good idea. He immediately set to work summoning Gree in a silent way so it could scoop up some sand with its hands as well. Slowly, he filled up the whole hole with sand and placed a somewhat smooth metal sheet he had found on top of it. It was clearly visible, but at least no one would get their feet stuck in it if they walked carelessly. He went back to the sandy beach and continued to experiment with his sounds. The next few months were exciting for him. His little accident with the concrete proved fruitful and gave him the idea of using his stored sounds on himself, in the first place. So far, he had found that a smash sound on his fist could definitely destroy a microwave. And the metal wall of the refrigerator behind it. The zoom he had used instinctively before made him go fast. About 40 km/h was his maximum before he couldn't control his movements anymore and crashed into the nearest thing, in this case the sea, if he used it. He didn't want to put his bones to the test by crashing into a wall, so he mostly used it to reach an average speed of 15 km/h without losing his stamina. When Ojiro suggested using the sound effects as armor, the results were not favorable for the blonde teenager. If he used smash and hit the spot, he would simply be knocked away. With zoom, the same thing would happen, although Ojiro said it didn't feel like someone had punched him, but more like a strong wind had pushed him really hard. At crunch, for which Izuku sacrificed his hand by hitting the wall, Ojiro went down on his knees and clutched his freshly bruised hand in pain. Izuku felt the blows he was receiving, but it felt like there was a soft wall between him and the blow, canceling out some of the force behind the blow. It still hurt Izuku, especially when Ojiro struck with his tail instead of his fists, but it hurt much less. Another limitation he noticed was that he couldn't move the kanas on the object after they appeared there, although he could control whether they appeared on the floor where he hit the microwave or on the microwaves themselves. Name: Hisashi Midoriya. Quirk: Fire Breath. Description: able to breathe a hot stream of fire from his mouth. As a side effect, his respiration system, mouth and face area are all fire resistant. Record for consistent stream of fire, 23 seconds. For years later. So I guess I will meet you at the beach again? Mashireo's voice asked through Izuku's phone. Yep, probably going to be a bit late. I still need to change my clothes. Izuku replied. I will see you there then. The line went silent as Izuku pocketed his phone in his school bag again before leaving school grounds and making his way home. It's been 4 years now since he extensively trained with his quirk. And also 4 years since he befriended Mashireo, something he was extremely grateful for. Despite vastly different hobbies, both of them seemed to get along too well, almost always forgetting the time when they talked or trained together with their quirks. Through him he even met Itsuka Kendo, another student in the same dojo as Mashireo, although he didn't know her too well, having her join them on their weekly hangout trips 7 times in total. Sure, his contact list might only be 5 names long, not counting Kaken, but he didn't really need more friends. Although it was kinda lonely now when Mashireo didn't have time for him. Despite the small inconvenience of craving social interaction with his best friends, his mental health has significantly improved, his stutter problem almost gone, except in front of a hero. Mashireo tried to help him with that, ultimately he couldn't without invoking a villain attack to let Izuku actually speak with the heroes. And in front of girls who are not named Itsuka Kendo. Something Itsuka tried to help with by introducing him to her friends, which ultimately resulted in Izuku having a meltdown and not responding to anyone for the rest of the day. Understandable in Mashireo's eyes if her friends didn't seem to know what personal space meant. I'm home. The door to his apartment seemed to open from itself, but he actually sent IAS through the door to open it. Something that he discovered he could do when he locked himself out of his own home because he forgot his keys and his mother wasn't home. An act of desperation honestly, but Izuku likes to call it fate. It had a nicer ring to it. Ah, Izuku, the shape of his mother greeted him. A lot has happened in her son's life, and seemingly all of them were good for her little baby. He smiled more, and none of them were forced. He frequently invited his friend over, which made her cry the first time the polite blonde boy stood before her door, and her son even had a strong quirk. The last thought made her smile, directed at her son, who was entering his room to change into a more comfortable thing, drop. Her son's quirk was something they actually rarely talked about. It was almost like a taboo in their household to not ask too many questions how his son got a quirk, according to her son, right after they visited the doctor. More curiously, a quirk that had nothing to do with any of their family's history. Inko knew about the mutation. The doctor, after analyzing Izuku, explained to her that a child may develop a completely unrelated quirk from their parents, but to have a completely unrelated quirk from their whole family made her really doubtful. She went back into the kitchen. If the soup were to be ruined because of her own internal musing, she would never forgive herself. In the end, she didn't really worry about the origin of her son's quirk. She worried more about his future. She hated herself in knowing a tiny part of her was relieved that her son couldn't become a hero. In her heart she knew that it was just too dangerous becoming one without a quirk. Her son had it hard enough in the world without a quirk, him wanting to become a hero, even after his quirk lessons, made her only worry more. But every time she looked into his face, into her son's face, she just couldn't. She just couldn't tell him that she didn't believe in him, that she wished he would stay safe, choose a non-dangerous occupation, and let her heart stop beating like a drum every time a villain attack was in their city, knowing that her son couldn't defend himself. She pulled out a knife. It was time to add the onions. Not only was his new quirk perfect for heroics, his creativity made the already strong quirk into something even above her. Half of the things Izuku told her he did every time he visited the beach, something she tried to stop him before ultimately just telling to be careful, would never even cross her mind. I'm going out for a while. Is it okay for Mashireo to eat with us? Her son asked, having already opened the door. Why yeah, you can invite your friend over. Inko sniffed, trying to avoid the onion juices as much as possible. Thanks Mom. The door closed and Inko was alone again. Now Inko was at a loss for options. There was no real reason why her son couldn't become a hero, why he couldn't live his dream. There was no reason why she couldn't believe in him, believe in her son to become a hero. Only the worries of a mother stopped her from fully accepting her son's dreams. Not for the first time, tears were streaming down Inko's eyes, the onions already added to the soup a long time ago. Name: Izuku Midoriya. Quirk: pull. Description: she has the ability to pull small objects to her with a hand motion and her mind. After waiting for about an hour, Izuku finally showed up at their designated meeting place. As usual, the overwhelming stench of garbage assaulted Izuku's nose, but it quickly dissipated. He had grown accustomed to the smell over time. Upon surveying the growing piles of rubbish, Izuku couldn't help but furrow his brows in displeasure. He suggested to his friend that they should clean up the beach, but they quickly dismissed the idea. They didn't know where to dispose of the vast amount of garbage, and the nearest rubbish bin was a daunting 200 meters away. They were also clueless about how to handle bulky appliances, such as the refrigerator, that were too big to fit into the bin. Despite the messy surroundings, they managed to find a nice spot to train and kept it clean. Mashireo even created some garbage statues of himself, which, in Izuku's opinion, resembled a comical dinosaur with an odd head. As Izuku approached his friend, who was standing in the middle of the serene, unspoiled sea view, Mashireo turned to greet him. Ah, Izuku, he said with a smile, I was starting to think you weren't going to show up. Izuku chuckled in response, as if I'd missed the chance to kick your butt. Mashireo chuckled along with him before leading the way to a makeshift table they had fashioned, complete with an old alarm clock sitting on top. Mashireo grumbled as he set the timer on the old alarm clock to 5 minutes. It's such a bummer that we can't do this more often now, he lamented. What did you expect? We're in our final year, Mashireo. It's not supposed to be a cakewalk, Izuku retorted, walking towards the other side of the wide ring they had marked on the sand with plastic bottles. Yeah, but I didn't anticipate having to study more for the UA entrance exam than for my current exams, Mashireo sighed before taking his place on the opposite side of the ring, facing Izuku. This is a great way to blow off some steam, though, don't you think? Humph, I'm always ready. Izuku replied, his voice brimming with excitement. He took a single stone out of his pocket and threw it high into the air. The two teenagers locked eyes, and everything outside the ring blurred and became out of focus as their attention was solely focused on their opponent. The stone soared to its highest point before plummeting to the ground at an impressive speed. 3, 2, 1. Thud. Mashireo soared through the air, propelled by his flexible and powerful tail that he used to slam the ground with, hurtling towards Izuku. The green-haired teen was already on the move, racing towards the stone he had thrown earlier and sending Deyhs ahead of him to retrieve it. The tailed boy, seeing Izuku's plan, quickly spun in midair, using his tail as a heavy point to increase his centrifugal force and plummeting straight down towards Deyhs. Unbeknownst to him, Deyhs had already returned to Izuku, who had continued sprinting forward and delivered a swift punch to his midriff and left leg as Mashireo landed perfectly on his feet, sending sand flying everywhere and the stone Izuku was chasing behind him. Without missing a beat, Mashireo spun again, using the momentum to hit Izuku in his stomach with his tail. It immediately got repelled back, almost slamming into him, if he didn't stop it in time. Izuku, who was now backing up, released a breath of air forcefully, creating a small blue huff kana from his mouth, sending it flying towards Mashireo. As soon as it made contact with him, his lungs forcefully expelled the stored air in it, causing him to stumble and stagger for a moment. But Izuku wasn't done yet. He followed up with a powerful punch, conjuring a smash kana on Mashireo's chest. Then, with lightning-fast reflexes, Deyhs threw another stone at the kana, causing it to activate and send him hurtling backwards, landing a good distance away from Izuku on his back. Mashireo stood back up, gritting his teeth as he wiped the sand off his face. He glared at Izuku, who was still grinning with excitement. New sound effect? Questioned the blonde teen, trying to catch his breath. Just got it yesterday by accident. Yelled Izuku before clapping his hands together. Clap! Before Mashireo could resume his sprint, Izuku slammed his hand on the ground, causing the sand around the kana to rise high, obscuring his form. Mashireo tried to locate him, but the sand was too thick. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his liver and quickly rotated, using his tail as a makeshift morning star to defend himself. He cursed under his breath, knowing that it must have been Deyhs. He took a moment to catch his breath, using the time to assess the situation. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he prepared for the next attack. Without hesitation, Mashireo charged forward, using his tail to launch himself into the air. As he flew through the sand, he felt the wind whipping through his hair, removing some of the sand in his hair. He saw Izuku's form through the sand and aimed a swift kick at him. Before he could, a stone flew toward his leg, impacting with his form resulted with him losing all momentum he got, falling back to the ground where Izuku was already staying. As Izuku prepared to use his sound attack again, a sudden jolt of pain shot through his eyes, forcing them shut. He winced and rubbed his eyes, struggling to regain his vision. But before he could open them, he was hit with sharp blows to his left side and right leg, causing him to stumble backward. A moment later, a similar blow to his back sent him hurtling forward. Mashireo had used the sand on his body to obscure Izuku's vision, taking advantage of the situation to land some strong hits. He would have continued his assault, but an invisible punch to his stomach caused him to wince in pain. With panic setting in, Izuku unleashed a barrage of weak punches behind him using IAS, hoping to halt Mashireo's attack. He then rushed forward with his eyes still closed, jumping slightly before descending and turning back around. Whoosh! As he landed, he willed the stored sound to materialize on his hand. He slapped his hand over his eyes, feeling the sound clear away the sand and moisture. After blinking several times to clear his vision, Izuku realized that Mashireo was no longer in front of him. Mashireo had sacrificed his front to allow IAS's weak punches to land, but he had used the opportunity to maneuver behind Izuku. Izuku quickly realized where his opponent was and directed IAS to punch his back. He felt the kana squishing on his back right as it was created and a grunt of pain from Mashireo, confirming his location. However, as Izuku turned around to face his opponent, he was met with a searing pain on the side of his face. Mashireo had struck him with a powerful tail whip, not letting his negated attack stop him. Despite the pain, Izuku refused to give up. He tried to retaliate by kicking him to the side, but the tail was already rotating around to counter his attack. Another blow on his left leg, which didn't cause him pain but made him stumble backwards. Mashireo, whose tail got violently repelled by, he presumed, a smash on Izuku's left leg, quickly readjusted himself before charging again. While the counter from Mashireo was unsuccessful, the after effects of the head blow made Izuku's ears still ring, losing his sense of balance. It was all the second Mashireo needed to land another blow on his left leg, now causing pain and dropping Izuku to a knee. Before he could do anything, he was lifted by his friend who now rotated with him, gaining more and more speed. Urareya! Mashireo's battle cry echoed in Izuku's ears, drowning out the ringing. Suddenly, he let go of Izuku, causing him to soar through the air and land on his back outside of the ring with a loud thud. Izuku lay there for a moment, catching his breath and trying to regain his senses. The pain in his leg throbbed, and his ears continued to ring. Wait, that wasn't his ears ringing. Putting an effort to turn his head towards the makeshift table, he could see that the 5 minutes were up. Seeing his friend catching his breath on the edge of his vision, Mashireo took a few breaths, before walking towards Izuku and helping him stand. Said boy stood for a good 2 seconds before heavily leaning on Mashireo for support. Izuku's leg throbbed with each step as they descended the stairs. Man, I got you good, huh? Asked Mashireo. His words were muffled by the ringing in his ears, making it difficult to concentrate. As they finally reached the top of the stairs, Izuku could feel his vision blurring, and he struggled to stay upright. I don't think I can make it, he muttered, feeling Mashireo's strong grip on his arm. Come on, hop on my back, his friend said firmly, crouching down. Izuku hesitated, but eventually, he allowed him to lift him onto his back. He winced as his friend's movements jarred his leg, causing a sharp pain to shoot through his body. Easy there, Izuku groaned, trying to keep his weight off his injured leg. Mashireo took the hint and adjusted his grip, making sure to support Izuku's weight more carefully. Then, with a grunt of effort, he began to carry Izuku towards his home. The journey was a blur of pain and discomfort, but eventually, they arrived at Izuku's doorstep. Mashireo set him down gently, and Izuku leaned heavily on the doorframe for support. Thanks, he muttered, feeling a sense of gratitude towards his friend. He smiled, but his expression was tinged with concern. Are you going to be okay? Izuku tried to reassure him that he was fine, despite the ringing in his ears and the pain in his leg. Come on, this isn't the worst I have experienced, he said with a weak smile. Mashireo couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. Izuku was always pushing himself to the limit, and it worried him. The fact that it's true makes me even more worried, he replied, sighing. After a moment of silence, Izuku finally asked, how close was I? His sparring partner thought for a moment before answering. The few smashes got me good, and that barrage actually managed to hit my liver again. I think another hit to it and I would need to replace it, he said with a chuckle, causing Izuku to smile briefly before they both winced in pain. Suddenly, an ominous voice interrupted their conversation from behind. And what, pray tell me, did you boys do again? A motherly voice asked. Izuku and Mashireo froze, slowly turning around to face the source of the voice. It was the last person they wanted to see right now, Izuku's mother. Didn't we have a talk already about this? She asked sweetly, her smile belying the sternness in her voice. The boys could only nod dumbly in response. Really? I think we need to have another talk then, she continued, her smile turning even sweeter. Izuku and Mashireo both shivered in dread. Name: Itsuka Kendo. Quirk: Big Fist. Description: she is able to almost instantaneously enlarge her hands into around 3 times her body size. Shoyuta Aizawa was having a gloomy day. As if the broken coffee machine in the teacher's lounge wasn't bad enough, which he suspected was Hisashi's fault, it was also raining. He hated rain. Well, not always. He enjoyed it when he could curl up in his cozy apartment with a hot mug of coffee and his cat on his lap. But any other time, he wished it would go away. Still, he had some reasons to smile. He felt a faint grin tug at his lips as he waited for his colleague to join him in the meeting room. One by one, the rest of the UA teachers filed into the spacious room and took their seats. Shoyuta quickly composed himself and hid his smile. The last and most important person arrived with a bang. Literally. There was a loud thud from the vents before a small white rodent dropped neatly onto his chair at the head of the table, holding a cup of what looked like tea. Shoyuta wondered if there was a kettle hidden in the vents, but he knew he would never find out. He was too big to fit in there. I'm sure you're all curious about this sudden meeting. Nizu's cheerful voice cut through his thoughts. There were several nods and murmurs of agreement. It's quite simple, really. Thanks to a persistent request, he glanced pointedly at Shoyuta, who shrugged it off, and after a long negotiation with the HPSC, we've reached a consensus. Nizu stood up on his chair, raising his cup in the air. The entrance exams for UA have been changed, he announced happily. Chaos ensued as everyone started asking questions. Shoyuta just leaned back in his seat, since he already knew everything about it. Does that mean no more robots? Maijima asked eagerly. That's right. The new system will have no robots at all. Nizu confirmed. Shoyuta couldn't tell what Maijima was thinking behind the smile that was spreading on his face, but he didn't really care. He had more important things on his mind, like the brand of the instant coffee he had bought. He took another sip. Ah, that hit the spot. UA's entrance exam changed. He clicked on one of the links and read the article with wide eyes. According to the official statement from Nizu, UA's principal, its entrance exam will be changed for the first time in decades. It really didn't state more, except that a preliminary test will be hosted that decides if the entrance exam can be taken in the first place. The article also mentioned that the change was partly due to a request from one of UA's teachers, Shoyuta Aizawa, who had argued that the old system was unfair and biased towards certain types of quirks. No sooner did Izuku read the article to the end, his phone vibrated and a message from Mashireo. Tails. Dude, have you seen the news? Green. About UA? Tails. Yeah, they are just changing the whole thing in our year. Green. Is it so bad though? Maybe the new system would be better. Tails. I doubt it can get better for us than smashing a few robo-heads. Green. We don't know that yet. Maybe it actually is? You know what I bet it is. Are you nervous? A voice to his left asked, breaking his reverie. And no. It's just theory, I can do this. Izuku protested, failing to sound confident. You're stuttering. Mashireo pointed out. He felt a surge of anxiety as he gazed at the towering structure in front of him. The main building of UA. It was the dream of countless aspiring heroes, and he was about to take the first step towards it. They watched as other hopefuls passed by them, each with their own worries and expectations. So, you are nervous? Mashireo teased after a while, grinning at Izuku's reaction. He was actually just as nervous as Izuku. Anyway, Izuku said, ignoring the mockery, and dashed ahead. Hey, wait for me, he heard his best friend call from behind him. But he didn't slow down. Until he stumbled on thin air. Izuku, is this really happening right now? Summoning instinctively in a silent way, he willed it to catch him by his neck, which it barely did. A sigh of relief came out of his mouth, and that of Mashireo, who finally caught up to him, before both looked in shock when a giant mushroom started growing before their eyes. He reacted quickly and summoned in a silent way, to catch him by his neck. He barely made it. He let out a sigh of relief, and so did Mashireo, who had finally reached him. But their relief turned to shock when they saw a giant mushroom sprout in front of them. Oh, sorry, a small voice apologized. They turned to see a girl with long brown hair that covered her eyes. She looked shy and nervous, ready to bolt at any moment. Holy sheet, a talking mushroom. Izuku had to suppress a snort at Mashireo's whisper. He wasn't entirely wrong. The girl's hair was so thick and round that it resembled a mushroom cap. I saw you were going to fall, so I used my quirk to cushion your landing, but you didn't need it and now I feel silly, she said, her voice getting quieter and more uncertain with each word. She didn't get any reassurance from Izuku and Mashireo, who were still staring and gawking at her. I'm sorry, she cried, and sprinted inside. The two teens stared at her vanishing form, before Mashireo helped Izuku get up, who was still held in midair. You're okay? A girl just talked to me. Do I not count? Izuku felt his heart stop as he jumped and wrapped his arms around Mashireo. Kendo? How long were you standing there? Mashireo asked, surprised. Just got here, she walked forwards before looking behind her. Are you two going to keep standing there or actually take the exams? She said before turning back around. They quickly looked at each other, Izuku letting go of the taller boy before they quickly followed the girl inside. A week later a letter found its way towards the Midoriya household. Sadly, both residents were out so nobody could read the content of the letter, sealed with the UA stempel. Izuku Midoriya? We are pleased to inform you that you have successfully passed the preliminary exams for admission to UA High School. You have achieved a score of over 90% on the written test, which exceeds the minimum requirement of 75%. You are now eligible to take the entrance exams, which will consist of a series of physical challenges. The entrance exams will be held at UA High School on xx.xx.xxxx at 8 a.m. Please find the enclosed details and instructions for the entrance exams. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact our secretary who will be happy to assist you. We look forward to seeing you soon. Sincerely, Nizu, principal of UA chapter text. Are you nervous? A familiar voice asked him from his side. Izuku felt a knot in his stomach as he looked at the towering building of UA. He was too nervous to speak, so he just nodded silently at Mashireo. The blonde boy glanced at him and then at the entrance, a hint of uneasiness in his expression. Why yeah, me too. The duo both took a deep breath and stepped towards the entrance, ready to take the real entrance exam after passing the preliminary test. They followed the arrows inside the building until they reached the same auditorium they were in when they got qualified for the test. Both of the teens sat next to each other in the middle row, noticing that not even half of the seats were occupied, unlike the last time when the room was packed with hopeful applicants. To their surprise, Present Mike appeared on the podium, as flamboyant as ever. Good morning, little listeners, he greeted them with his booming voice. It seems like all participants could attend today. Mashireo's eyes widened and he scanned the room. Were these really all the people who passed the preliminary test? He quickly counted the heads in the room, while trying to pay attention to present Mick's opening speech. Now that I have your undivided attention, I can explain the new and improved entrance exams for UA to you. Please raise your hands for questions at the end. Starting with 2, 7, 19, 29, 41, 67, 73, 80. There are only 80 people here. He thought back on the test. Sure, it wasn't easy, but only 80 people passed? His 80% score on his test seemed a lot less reassuring than a few hours ago. Present Mike smiled and raised his hand in a dramatic gesture. Capture the flag, he shouted, making everyone jump in their seats. The projector behind them all sprang to life and displayed a picture of a figure with a headband. You will all be going to a giant mock city with one headband as your point. Your goal is to collect more than 6 headbands dash. A loud outburst erupted across the room. Most, if not all, of the participants were shouting in shock about the high goal condition. A loud grinding sound came from beside the podium, revealing Powerloader, who broke a metal sheet with his iron claws. I suggest you wait until my colleague has finished speaking, he simply said before handing a pointer to Present Mike. Thank you. So you may wonder why the requirements are so high, right? Nobody answered him. It's quite simple. These are the conditions for a team. Low murmurs began to spread across the room. Present Mike seemed to ignore them and continued. You can form a team of 4 whenever you want. Before the exam, during the exam, 1 minute before the end of the exam, with all members saying an agreement out loud. You cannot make a team with less than 4 people and cross-teaming is not allowed and will lead to disqualification, he clarified. The requirements for 1 person are only 2. Another loud burst from all the students, this time more signs of relief than anything else. Mashireo could see some already talking to their seat neighbors, probably already forming teams. Some seemed to be thinking hard, probably weighing their options. Any additional headbands will increase your chances of success. Does that mean there are questions at the end, little listener? Present mic interrupted a blue-haired glasses-wearing participant. My apologies, the teen said, bowing deeply before sitting down again. No worries there. Anyway, anything with your quirk is allowed as long as it doesn't cause significant harm to your fellow participants. Izuku felt a chill down his spine as Present Mic's voice and smile suddenly turned dark and menacing. He leaned forward on the podium and widened his grin, showing his teeth. If you deliberately injure someone and send them to the nurse's office, then you will be banned from entering any hero school in Japan and your record will be stained forever. The room was silent, everyone feeling the pressure of his words. But that's not going to happen, right? His cheerful voice and smile returned, as if nothing had happened. He looked like a ray of sunshine, bright and warm. I trust that you all will behave like true heroes. Anyhow, now that quirk rules are out of the way, one final rule is the capturing of the headband. The headband must be displayed somewhere on the body where it is easy to spot. If you are in a team, only the person with a headband can take another one's headband. If a team has no headbands, anyone can take one until someone has one again. Mashireo was thinking. Me or Izuku? Izuku could probably put some sounds on it to deflect a few shots, I could probably put it on my tail, or my actual head. He looked around, there are a few people who are taller than me. Are you ready for this, listeners? The exam will last for a whopping 6 hours. Present mic announced. The room exploded in disbelief. How could they expect them to fight for that long? Present mic waited patiently for the noise to subside, which eventually happened. Don't worry, you'll have a break before the action starts. You'll have an hour of grace PRD in our cafeteria where you can grab some snacks, on the house. Then you'll be randomly assigned to an area where you'll begin. You can find your location info under your desk. Everyone looked under their desks, seeing a small drawer that could be opened. Upon opening it, Izuku found a piece of paper with the letter C on it and a small watch. That watch is your best friend for this exam. Just try it on and see. Present mic encouraged. Izuku put the watch on his right wrist, locking it in place. It turned on with a UA logo and displayed a 6-hour countdown. As soon as the exam begins, the countdown will start ticking down, telling you exactly when it's over. Also, by pressing the button on the right 3 times, you can call for a nurse bot to come to your location right away. But be warned that it will take you out of the exam. Teams who lose a member this way will not be disbanded and may let another participant join their team. Solo participants who keep their headbands will get a penalty if they have no serious injury and want to quit the exam. Mashireo looked at the side of his watch and saw a small button that was barely visible. The watches are super durable, but if they somehow get smashed, a nurse bot will come to the rescue. Present mic assured them. The presentation continued like that, with Present mic energetically explaining the rules and features of the new exam. Izuku felt his confidence dwindling with every word. He had to fight other people? He really didn't want to harm anyone. He was here to be a hero, not a villain. He felt a gentle nudge on his side and turned to see Mashireo. The tail boy gave him a supportive thumbs up. He could see the resolve in his eyes. He was prepared for this challenge. Izuku took a deep breath and tried to steady his nerves. He gave Mashireo a thankful smile and returned the thumbs up. He had to trust in himself and his quirk. He had to do his best. That's all, folks. At least for the rules. Now do you have any more questions? Present mic asked around the room. The same blue-haired examinee stood up again, his hand raised high up. Yes, examinee number 25. The blue-haired teen's voice echoed throughout the whole room, somewhat startling Izuku who had been lost in thought. Earlier you said that having more headbands will increase our chances of success, the teen said, his posture rigid and straight. Does that mean that we can fail even if we have the required amount of points? Excellent question, little listener. The answer is yes. Outrage erupted once more in the entire room. Present mic didn't seem fazed, not bothering to interrupt the various shouts of indignation. My little listeners, he said at one point, seeing that the room wouldn't quiet down, as stated in the envelope of additional information that came with the acceptance letter, you can drop out at any point during the exam if you wish to do so. He said, a smile still on his face, his voice not hinting even an ounce of anything but enthusiasm. The crowd calmed down. The glasses-wearing boy was speechless for a few seconds, not expecting the answer, his mouth opening and closing from time to time before nodding and sitting down again. Any more questions? Present mic asked around the room. Another teen raised his hand. Izuku looked over, seeing a boy with black hair held up by a blue and white crossed headband. How will you know when we make or disband a team? He asked in a more reasonable volume. Also a good question, little listener. From the letter that all of your parents got per email and signed, we are allowed to take temporary audio of you, he vaguely gestured to his right wrist, and videos per our camera system. With that we will see who is in what team and when they disband. Present Mike answered. I do want to repeat, teams of 4 only, no more no less. And the disbanding and forming of a team can only be performed when all members agree to it out loud. How do we find our teammates in the mock city if we make a team now? Another examiner asked. That sounds like a you problem. Present Mike quipped, earning some laughs. More questions followed, each one swiftly answered. Izuku scribbled down every rule and new question, while Masahiro whispered them in his ear as they kept coming. Finally, the questions died down and Present Mike announced the end of the presentation. He wished everyone good luck and told them to get a headband from the table next to the door and to head to the cafeteria for their break. He also reminded them to check their location papers and watches before leaving. Izuku and Masahiro got up from their seats and followed the crowd, taking one headband. They looked at each other for a second, a silent conversation passing between them before Masahiro threw the headband to Izuku, him having tied one on his left shoulder and the new one on the head. 2 young men walked into the bustling UA cafeteria, grabbing trays of food before scanning the room for an open spot to sit and eat. The place was alive with the noise and activity of other exam takers, some appearing confident and excited, while others seemed anxious and nervous. A few sat in groups of 4, laughing and chatting away, while others sat alone, either looking for potential teammates or content to eat solo. Masahiro nudged Izuku, pointing towards a nearly empty table with a lone girl sitting anxiously. That's, Izuku didn't hesitate, nodding eagerly as they made their way over to her. The girl noticed them approaching, but pretended not to. As they walked past several empty tables, making a beeline towards her, the girl began fidgeting, looking behind her to see if there was someone else. Just as she realized the reflection in the window was her, a voice behind her asked, "Is this seat empty?" She whipped around to see the same 2 boys standing before her. The blonde with the long tail looked at her curiously, waiting for a response, while the green-haired boy fidgeted and avoided eye contact. "Ah, me?" she stammered. The blonde scanned the room, she did the same. Not a soul around them. Their eyes met again. She blushed. "So the plan is pretty simple," explained Izuku after sitting down for a while with Masahiro. "We plant traps, search for a good spot to hide, and as soon as our trap falls shut, I will sprint in and take the headband before fleeing back into the hiding spot." It was a lousy plan at best. Honestly, Izuku was happy they had one at all. But considering he himself didn't have a good quirk for melee, neither did the girl that introduced herself as Kanoko Komori. She was timid and shy, barely speaking above a whisper. She could emit spores around her that could quickly grow mushrooms, but she couldn't control the spores' trajectory and they spread slower with less humidity. It was quickly decided that Izuku and Komori were the support while Masahiro fought at the front. "We should probably take someone that has offensive or defensive capabilities," suggested Masahiro in between bites, Izuku and Komori nodding. Komori played with her food, rolling around a mushroom with her knife. Izuku looked towards his friend who only shrugged before looking around. There were a lot more groups of 4 now, some like them were only groups of 3 and the minority was definitely solos. "Maybe, some of them are actually looking for a team?" questioned Komori, still playing with her food and barely audible. Izuku gulped down the rest of his steaming soup before helping the 2 in finding a 4th teammate. Quite a lot more solos than he expected. Then again, if they had some strong offensive quirk, all they needed was a single headband to pass. Increase your chances of success. He felt put off by those sentences. Unfair he would call it. What if someone or a team worked tirelessly to get at the required amount only to fail because they didn't go beyond? "Guess that's what they mean by plus ultra," supplied Masahiro without looking at him, Izuku blushing in embarrassment having said that out loud. "A bit unfair," agreed Komori timidly. The team of 3 continued searching around them. Until Izuku stumbled upon someone quite peculiar. His head. "Izuku! Don't stare!" Masahiro harshly whispered in Izuku's ear. Sorry," he turned towards his friend, "he had a bird head but a human body. I couldn't help myself." "You think he has some kind of Fabian quirkless the mutation completely unrelated o dash?" Masahiro made an apologetic look towards Komori. "Sorry, he gets excited when he sees an interesting quirk." Komori simply nodded, watching the teen mumble to himself. "Honestly, sometimes I think I can see the mumbling as a word around him," he joked. Several minutes passed with Izuku continuing to mumble. Komori eventually looked at her watch. Besides the 6-hour countdown, in the right corner the real time was displayed in small numbers. They still had half an hour break. "Who there, you've got quite the lung capacity." A new voice announced itself directly behind Izuku, causing him to scream in fright. The whole cafeteria quieted down and looked at him, who had jumped on the table, unknown to everyone else in a silent way was standing behind him. Before them was a light-skinned boy wearing a normal gray tracksuit. Nothing special about him except for the non-existent head that was replaced with a speech bubble. Masahiro stared, Izuku stared, Komori stared, and the boy stared. The rest of the cafeteria remained silent. "Oh, sorry for startling you," stuttered the boy out. Izuku remained frozen, until he desummoned his quirk and slowly got off the table. The cafeteria chatter slowly resumed, increasing in volume before they all seemingly forgot the event. "It's fine," quickly shot out Izuku, feeling a slight bit embarrassed. "What's your name?" asked Masahiro after him, although it was clear why the teen was at their table. "It's Manga Fukudashi." The boy announced himself with a theatrical bow, his demeanor flipping completely and his posture exuding confidence as he flicked his thumb toward his speech bubble head. "And I noticed you're one member short. How about you add me to your team and we'll become the greatest hero squad of all time?" Masahiro took a good look at the teen. Besides his obvious head mutation, there was really nothing out of the ordinary about the guy. Perhaps he could defeat Izuku in an arm wrestling contest, which isn't really a feat. He was pretty sure Komori could beat Izuku in an arm wrestling match, but that wouldn't amount to much when they were fighting. "What's your quirk?" he finally asked after a while. Fukudashi's posture changed, and his head bubble widened as if he had been waiting for this question. "You probably noticed that my head is a speech bubble, right? I mean, how can you miss that? My quirk allows me to speak sound effects from manga with dramatic flair, and they become real." As he spoke, he flailed his arms wildly to emphasize his flamboyant personality before sitting down. What? Masahiro turned to Izuku, noticing his wide-eyed expression. "Impressive, isn't it?" exclaimed Fukudashi with intense excitement. "You have a quirk that's very similar to Midoriya." Komori's voice barely registered over Fukudashi's exuberance. "Huh, really?" Manga leaned in towards Komori, who panicked and leaned back further. "You sound storage." Izuku mumbled, still a bit shocked by the sudden appearance of this eccentric new member. Fukudashi stared at him with a renewed intensity, his speech bubble head seeming to pulsate with excitement. "Sound storage? Holy crap, man," he exclaimed, his fists balled and a fiery aura surrounding him. "That's freaking perfect, dude. We're gonna be the most epic hero squad to ever exist with our quirks. The sky's the limit with us," he exclaimed, unable to contain his enthusiasm. His body shook with excitement as he continued to talk, his voice growing louder with each word. His eyes wide with excitement. "Can you feel it, guys? The thrill of battle. The clash of powers. The sound of victory." He stood up from his seat and pumped his fists in the air. "Once the enemy team sees us, they'll be trembling in their boots. They'll try to come at us like Zoom with all they've got, but we'll hit M with the BAM combo, then blam, and bang again. And they'll be like thwack and then." The teen boy continued to bounce with excitement, almost climbing onto the table before Masahiro grabbed his shoulder to stop him. All right, you're in," Masahiro said, trying to calm down the hyperactive Manga. "Awesome," Manga exclaimed, his speech bubble head bobbing up and down. "I promise I'll keep my excitement in check, but sometimes I just can't help myself." He chuckled, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. The others nodded, amused. "Don't worry, we all have our quirks," Masahiro said with a smirk, earning a round of groans and eye rolls from the table. "Haven't seen any of you make a joke," he mumbled before he extended his hands towards Manga, Masahiro, Ojiro. "Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you." He also extended his hand. Manga shook it with a firm grip. "Likewise, Midoriya. This is gonna be awesome," he exclaimed, unable to contain his energy. Kanoko introduced herself quietly after the boisterous exchange, and the group shared a smile, before continuing planning. Kanoko looked at her watch again. 20 more minutes. Masahiro Ojiro, A. Izuku Midoriya, C. Manga Fushicade, D. Kanoko Komori, A. Despite the unpleasant bus ride to the A-zone, Masahiro was confident in his abilities. Izuku had taught him many ways to apply and use his quirk, in addition to his own ideas and training in martial arts. However, he couldn't shake off the anxious feeling that had settled in his stomach. It wasn't because of his teammate, who started in the same zone as him and was right next to him in the forest. The starting zone was vast, almost like a giant park with trees and hills. Masahirio's teammate had explained her quirk in detail, and they had discovered that it worked better in humid areas, making the forest the perfect place. The thick canopy of trees blocked out much of the sunlight, and the many trees provided excellent cover to sneak out of the zone as quickly as possible. But what really made him nervous was Izuku's well-being. Their plan, which was for Izuku to wear the headband and meet in Zone C once the exam started, seemed much more confident when they didn't yet know how huge even one of the zones was. "Are you ready?" asked Masahiro, trying to hide his nervousness. He couldn't afford to show any weakness, especially not in front of Komori. She reminded him of Izuku when they first met, shy, anxious, but determined. She gave him a brief nod and concentrated on the task at hand. Mashirao looked at his watch. Only 10 seconds left. He took up the position of a runner and Komori stood behind him. He felt her hands on his shoulders and knew that she was as nervous as he was. It had been Izuku's idea to let Komori ride on Mashirao's back, something they had both agreed to after it had become clear that she wasn't the athletic type. It was faster for Mashirao to carry both of them, a task he had gotten used to during his training with Izuku. He took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing pulse. He could do this. Then a loud voice came from outside the forest. "Alol Reunited, are you all ready? The entrance exams begins. Now." He sprinted as fast as he could, making sure to keep his body under control. Dodging the trees as if he had been born in the forest, he made his way out of the forest quickly and steadily. It wasn't really easy, not the running, but the navigating. He wasn't much of a navigator, but in this forest, where every tree was the same shade of brown in his eyes and the only tree that existed in his mind was an oak, it was a bloody maze. Good thing his job was just to walk in a straight line as best as the trees in his path would allow. Komori had a harder time than Mashirao, clinging to his shoulder to keep from falling off him and being forgotten like a fungal spore that had nested in a small crack in a tree and never saw the sun again. The only difference was that Komori was still human and needed things like water, sun, and warm pockets. Her grip on Mashirao tightened, which he tried to ignore as best he could, because it really started to hurt when the sound of explosions could be heard in the distance. That and the occasional scream. "Someone behind us?" breathed Mashirao, keeping his gaze fixed in front of him. Komori looked behind her, the scenery changing quickly, almost blurring. She saw no one. "Watch out!" Mashirao instinctively threw himself to the side to avoid something huge coming towards them. He was careful not to roll or use his back so as not to push Komori away. When he got a good look, he could see that it was something large. Something that was black in texture, but still moving somehow. Wait, that was a giant hand. Komori followed the rest of the appendages with his eyes and saw the arm disappear into the blackness of the forest. The movement of the hand drew her back to the more pressing matter at hand. When the hand realized it wasn't catching anything, it quickly retreated back into the deeper forest, disappearing into the darkness. Komori was definitely shaking with fear now. Huge black hands that could probably crush her in an instant? Yes, she should get out of this zone. She didn't like it at all. "Ojiro, do you have a plan?" stammered Komori, looking at the last place where the giant hand had disappeared. "Yes, I do," he said grimly, keeping his eyes on the same spot as hers. "Really?" Hope blossomed in her chest, hope that they might actually make it out of this forest alive. Preferably with their limbs intact. "Yeah, that's something Izuku drilled into me. Something that is important in any fight, when it counts," he said, somehow grimmer than before, even with a dangerous undertone in his voice. What is it?" she asked, looking at him and seeing his concentrated face. "Swallow your pride and hot food it out of here." He grabbed Komori's legs and pulled her even closer to his back, eliciting a squeal from her before he ran, like the devil was after him, in the opposite direction. From what they had seen, it wasn't far off. The very reasonable screaming of Komori didn't help his panicked state. Sure, he could probably go up against another examiner and a robot twice his size. With Izuku's help he could probably go up against a robot 50 times his size, but alone with a support that couldn't defend herself against an eldritch Fing demon, that's where he drew the line and made it a circle around him so that it would never reach him. Too bad the Ancient Ones were in the mood to mess with him. "It's catching up," came the shout scream from Komori on his back, increasing her already titanic grip on his shoulder to tectonic strength. He didn't really need any more motivation than that death seemed to be in the mood to follow them. Screw the plan to conserve energy. He would just take a nap later when they regrouped. By increasing his speed through sheer Fing will, he thankfully increased the distance between them and their imminent extinction. Something Komori appreciated. It was still after them, though. XXXXX. Manga found himself in a rather large park. There was a large lake, some benches, and even a picnic area. He would have liked the scenery a lot more if there hadn't been about 20 participants surrounding him, fighting to the death. He ran along the path like Sonic, hoping to get out of the makeshift coliseum as soon as possible, since he couldn't see the entrance to the park from where he was. All the while, explosions, screams and yelling could be heard all around him. Was this even legal? He was pretty sure child fighting was illegal. He ducked under someone's body as it flew over him and heard him groan in pain. He turned around, a rush of excitement coming over him as he saw that the person was wearing a headband, and started to grab it. Then stopped and ran in the opposite direction. He remembered again that in a team, only the person with the headband is allowed to take a headband. He didn't really understand anything around him. Sure, he understood that they were fighting for the headbands and thus a spot in the UA, but half of the fights were with people without headbands, which meant that they had started a fight for no good reason, except maybe to eliminate the competition first. It didn't matter anyway, he only had one plan in mind. Flee and regroup with his team, lay low until then, and try not to expend too much energy. Luckily, his teammates had chosen the right person for the job. Manga didn't want to brag, but he had finished third in the sprint test in his school. That was a couple of years ago. This led to him running past all the fights. It wasn't that hard, since no one seemed to notice him, and he could even see the exit. It couldn't get any better than this, could it? Or so he thought, until the ground cracked open and thorny vines shot out of the holes. What the dash, he jumped into the air, rolling to the side and barely managing to escape. The spines continued to sprout into the empty air, intertwining to form spikes that almost looked like they were trying to impale him. Is this the Hunger Games? Manga didn't have time to think about it any longer, because as soon as he landed on his knees, the same vibration shook the ground beneath him, making him jump away again. Hey, I don't have headbands, peace, he shouted after another attack on him missed. He held himself high in the air, his stance leaning back, ready to jump again at any moment. What he hadn't counted on was a movement in the corner of his eye that made his head jerk, only to see a girl rise from the bench she had been sitting on. A girl with very similar vines for hair. I don't seek headbands, she stated matter-of-factly. Manga grunted in displeasure, he hated that bureaucracy kind of tone, especially if it was used on him. So what do you want? He shouted back. You see, she now turned towards him, I search for companionship. Manga was speechless for a moment and lowered his arms again. You want a teammate? I don't know what friendship books you've been reading, but attacking people won't win you many sympathy points with them, and besides, I'm already on a team. I see, let's start from the beginning, then, she cleared her throat, my name is Ibra Shiozaki. I seek a teammate. Prepare for conversion. What? Another round of vines came after him, attempting to grab him. Oh sheet dash. Compared to the others, Izuku didn't have to do much. All he had to do was wait a few minutes and then somehow give a big signal for his team to gather. The first part of the plan was easy enough. He simply walked into one of the many empty office buildings in Zone D and hid in a broom closet. Until the silence became unbearable and he decided to walk through the empty hallways instead. He wasn't sure if that was better. As he walked, he threw small pebbles he found in the streets on the floor, applying the thud kana on all of them. He really wished the school would give them a map or something, a map that didn't just have the basic outline of the zones and their starting points in the zones. He crumpled the useless piece of paper in his hands and threw it behind him. Only to pause, walk back, pick it up again, and put it in his pocket. Sometimes he really hated his paranoia, but his mind conjured up the most abstract and unlikely scenarios that would probably never happen in a million years, causing him and his entire team to fail the exam and thus any hope of getting into UA. Great, the two headbands on his head and the two headbands on his shoulders now felt like elephants. He just had to think about it. A kana of WOSHH suddenly appeared out of nowhere at the corner. His quirk was beside him in an instant, preparing for battle. The hallway remained silent, only the occasional sounds of distant battles outside the building could be heard. Izuku paused in his stance, his hair standing on end. If he didn't have his quirk, he might have dismissed it as his paranoia, but he had his quirk and knew that he could only generate kanas when there was a noise. How to play this? Izuku's mind ran at full speed. It was a bit stupid of him to immediately go into a fighting stance and alert the enemy that they had heard him, but hindsight is always 20/20, so he didn't bother to sweat over it. What was on his mind was the ongoing battle. Nothing had happened yet, but the enemy knew that he knew someone else was here, and that someone had been in the dark corner at the end of the corridor. He dropped his stance and took a more relaxed one instead, keeping his quirk next to him. Slowly, he made his way to the end of the hallway as he had originally planned, keeping a close eye on the corner. A few meters away. He willed his quirk to get the small pebbles out of his pockets and hid its hand behind his back. His feet touched the shadow. He stood there for a good 10 seconds, but nothing seemed to happen. Slowly, he brought one hand closer to the kana and touched it with the palm of his hand. A light gust of wind passed behind him, almost forcing him to press against the cold stone before it disappeared. Someone went through the wall? Izuku took a few steps back again, examining the spot once more, before he turned away and walked back. Wash! His quirk moved its hand behind Izuku and threw half of the small pebbles it was holding around, causing a HRGH grunt. He rolled forward to get some distance, spun around as he stood up behind him, only to see nothing. Nothing but a WOSHH sound on the ground. It was easy to decide what to do next. Izuku turned around and headed for the exit. All members agreed on that. He even suggested not to take any risks and to play it safe until they reassembled. That seemed to be a risk not to take. Izuku wasn't really prepared for an unknown opponent who could disappear in the blink of an eye. The usual top-heavy people, sure, throw a stone, watch them wonder where their momentum had gone and give them the good, smash, left-right combo. But he'd rather not fight someone who could possibly steal his headband and escape. He jumped down the stairs without worrying about security. He had to get out of here as soon as possible. It was probably better for him to go out and look for his teammates instead of camping out in a place where no one would find him anyway. He still didn't have a plan on how to deal with the signal, but he could worry about that later. He could already see the exit at the end of the corridor. He suddenly felt like he was in free fall. He tripped over something. The feeling of someone touching his head made it clear what the person was going for. Arg! The sound above made it also clear that the intruder activated one of his kanas. Komori, can I borrow your knife? One of the 7 kanas was gone from the protection he had given the headbands. He rolled sideways on the ground to put some distance between himself and his enemy. Nobody there again. This was exceptionally bad, the same kana on a nearby wall again, almost as if it was guarding the hallway. Wait, grabbing his headband meant that this person had one as well. That, or he was a solo who had already lost his. Less likely, since it was only about 20 minutes from the start. It also meant that the person was taking a risk by engaging him, which meant that he could possibly steal a point for his team if he played his cards right. The risk was still there, but this time he knew he could get something out of it, and from his behavior it seemed that the person didn't want a one-on-one fight, which only meant that he didn't have a strong offensive quirk and was probably on a team in the same situation as him. The chance of catching someone without a team was slim enough, but it was higher at the beginning of the trials. Such an opportunity wouldn't come again. And Izuku took every opportunity he could. He stared at the kana as if it represented the enemy. In a silent way. To be continued. Mashireo with Komori on his back was still running through the thick foliage that was the forest behind them, the same giant black hand clawing at them. What is that thing? Mashireo huffed out in frustration. After around 20 minutes of sprinting, occasionally losing the monster to catch a breath, only for it to find them again and repeat the first step. He was far above their team when it came to pure physical stats, but even he was slowly getting exhausted from the constant running, especially since he had Komori still on his back. Said girl was calming down a lot, not in the sense that she wasn't shaking in fear, which she slightly still did, but she was slowly trying to form up a plan for Ojiro, seeing him gradually lose more and more energy. She just didn't know how yet. Any mushrooms she spawned on the giant claw would almost instantly be removed by smashing them on the ground and grinding them into toothpaste. They didn't even know what kind of quirk that was in the first place. If it even was a quirk and not some robot that UA had in stock for the unfortunate souls that met them. Another sharp turn from Ojiro to escape the pursuing hand kicked her out of her thoughts, increasing her grip strength on his shoulder that were already sweaty. She looked once again behind them, the hand was gone once more and she tapped Mashireo on the hand twice to signal it to him. Without looking up, Mashireo took another turn, jumping into some large bushes. He let Komori slowly down before flopping to the ground, thoroughly exhausted. I need a break, he whizzed out in a whisper, trying to take shallow breaths as silently as possible. Komori only nodded before moving some branches from the bushes to obscure them more. Both were grateful for the rest they got, moving and interacting with the branches as silently as possible. 30 minutes from the start of the exams. Izuku must be wondering where we are, mused Ojiro. Not that they themselves knew where they were, the constant sharp turns and sprinting destroyed any semblance of direction they had. I just don't understand why they would go for us, hurriedly whispered Kanoko, wanting the adrenaline in her system to vanish. Ojiro remained laying on the ground, half of his face tasting the soothing cold hard ground where they were. Honestly, he could have taken a short nap right about now. His eyelashes were about to close for good if a rustling in the bushes across from them hadn't alerted them to someone else's presence. Dark Shadow, how did you lose them? A slow, strained masculine voice said from behind the bushes. Both Kanoko and Mashireo froze, stopping any of their movements. None of them could see beyond the leaves of the bushes that gave them the camouflage they used to hide in the first place, but they still could hear everything. More rustling sounds, footsteps, and the sound of yelling. This is so boring. Tokoyami, please let's fight some other team, said Yell was definitely by a different person, this one not the least drained but rather whiny and frustrated. We've been chasing those suckers. A grunt of someone before the sound of something hitting the forest floor was heard. The whiny voice was abruptly cut off and weirdly enough didn't start speaking again. Komori was holding her breath the entire time, not wanting to announce their presence, especially since Mashireo was still winded and she herself couldn't fight very well, or at all. Mashireo was doing the exact same thing, trying to stop his need for more oxygen to regain his spent energy. The same voice that had been drained was audible, taking deep breaths of air. "Ugh," the person said before seemingly standing up once again, with some grunts of protest, and stumbling away from them, if the sounds of footsteps retreating were anything to go by. Kanoko slowly started breathing again at an audible rate. Half relieved that she could finally breathe normally, half relieved that they were in the clear. She looked back to Ojiro, who was lying on the ground with his eyes closed. He had laid back down as soon as the unknown person left. Who was that?" asked Kanoko finally after a while. Mashireo, who was so close to drifting off, just groaned. From the sound of it, Komori shuffled around before a bit of sunlight hit Mashireo in the face. "What are you doing?" he whispered. There was no reply, but a few seconds later the sunlight hitting him was obscured once again. "Sorry, sunlight," his partner stammered. Mashireo had no idea what she was talking about and was very much too tired to think about it, so he didn't, simply closing his eyes again and hoping this moment would last a bit longer. Mashireo woke up to the sunlight hitting his eyes again. He let out a big yawn and sat up, but then his eyes went wide as he realized where he was. He froze, not moving or making a sound, just looking around. Complete silence. He breathed a sigh of relief, slumping his shoulders back down. But then he noticed something. He was all alone. "Komori," he whispered, but there was no answer. "Komori," he whispered again, this time a bit louder. Still no response. Mashireo stood up and peered out of the bush he was hiding in. Nobody seemed to be around, so he slowly stepped out. It hit him that he must have dozed off longer than he intended. His limbs made a loud popping sound as he stretched, feeling the need to get his blood flowing again. Not knowing what happened to his partner, Ojiro called out once more. "Komori." Nothing. The feeling of dread started to creep in. He tried to shake it off and summon some courage. "Komori." Except for startling a flock of birds into flight, there was no answer. He realized he might have given away his location for no reason. He wasn't even sure if there were enemies nearby anymore. All he knew was that something must have happened to Komori while he was resting, and now she was either lost or captured. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten. Could it be that Komori's hunger got the better of her, and she went off in search of food? Wait, why couldn't she just eat her own mushrooms? Or were they somehow gross or inedible since they were part of her quirk? Mashireo took a deep breath and scanned the area again, trying to find any clues. His eyes wandered, taking in the trees, darkness, and bushes. He noticed roots sticking out of the ground, creating little traps for anyone who wasn't paying attention. Most of the bushes were either small or tightly packed with branches, forming a solid wall. The ground had footprints, some he recognized, some he didn't. His gaze locked onto a set of footprints that didn't belong to their pursuer. They led deeper into the forest, or maybe out of it. One thing was for sure, they were the perfect size for Komori, who was on the petite side. Without wasting any time, Mashireo followed the footprints, trying to be as quiet as possible. He didn't want a repeat of what happened earlier, even if it meant moving at a slower pace. As he ventured further, the scenery changed. The small bushes and trees were replaced by bigger ones that made it hard to see the footprints. Mashireo couldn't understand why Komori would walk straight into such dense bushes. Finally emerging from the tangle of vegetation, he found himself in a clearing. He brushed off some small sticks from his hair and dusted off his pants, not really paying attention to his surroundings just yet. The slight feeling of dread he had earlier turned into full-blown terror as he took in the scene before him. Trees and bushes were sliced and torn, craters and slash marks covered the ground. And mushrooms. They were everywhere. They grew on the trees, dead or alive, and littered the ground. Many of them were trampled, giving the impression of a wild struggle. If Ojiro had to describe what he saw in one word, it would be warzone. Komori hated being so easily overlooked. It sucked that people often forgot about her because, well, she wasn't anything special. Sure, it helped with her social anxiety, but it didn't do much for her self-esteem. But right now, she was grateful for her small size. Hiding in these bushes wasn't something she ever expected to be doing, especially in some crazy battle royale setup with a teammate who towered over her. When UA announced they were changing up the entrance exams, she pretty much lost all hope of getting into the hero course. But her family convinced her to give it a shot, and somehow she made it through the preliminaries. Then came the real deal, fighting against each other. Sitting there alone, eating her soup in silence, she seriously considered just giving up. Who needed this kind of fighting and getting beaten up? And now, here she was, stuck on a team of 4. Well, kind of. 2 of them were off doing who knows what, and one was passed out, napping like it was a picnic or something. She glanced over at Ojiro, who managed to outrun and outlast that monster chasing them. And he did it all with her on his back the whole time. She couldn't help but feel a bit envious. His quirk was so simple, yet he made it this far. But what had she done? Absolutely nothing. Useless. Worthless. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten in what felt like forever. She checked her watch. 5 hours and 8 minutes left. Ojiro ran for about an hour with her on his back. No wonder he was wiped out. Another growl from her stomach made her realize just how hungry she was. She sat there, lost in thought, until a genius idea popped into her head. If she was starving from doing nothing, Ojiro must be dying of hunger when he wakes up. Komori. Having long since given up on his own safety, Ojiro practically sprinted down the path that was leading away from the battlefield. His mind plagued with worry, he barely acknowledged the occasional branch hitting his side while running, or sometimes tripping from the roots that were growing out of the ground. He immediately stood back up again as if nothing happened and ran faster to make it up. 6 people, he counted each individual footprint and there were 6 people present. Although the trail he has been following had only 3 footprints and 1 continuous line. The other 3 footprints, one being Komori, were nowhere to be found, so either she had managed to evolve into a flying creature or she must have been defeated, the same as the other 2, and gotten captured. For what reason he had no idea. The only thing he did know was that he had to get her back as quickly as possible and then finally meet up with the rest of their team. Easier said than done apparently, since the footprints didn't seem to end. In his mind he already tried to come up with several plans to get her out, before concluding that it didn't do him any good to overthink it. Not to mention that he had no idea where or how she was kept. Or if she even was with the team. The only thing he did know was that he had no talent in stealth, except when he crawled. Maybe in the future it could prove useful, but at the moment a charge in assault should do the trick. In the distance, there was a presence that caught his attention. He momentarily halted his pursuit of whatever he had been chasing, a glimmer of hope that it might be his lost teammate. She shouldn't. Careful. Although too distant to discern any details, it was evident that they hadn't yet noticed his approach. He lowered himself to the ground, ensuring his tail had enough room to maneuver, and began to crawl closer. And look where it got her. A distinct, assertive female voice rang out, even louder than before. He couldn't see anything yet, prompting him to pause his cautious advance. She saved us. We can't just let them escape. A different, resolute male voice interjected. A frustrated "TSK" was followed by silence. Fine. If you're so intent on saving her, go ahead. I'm not sacrificing my chances of getting into UA for a girl I barely know. Ha! That girl saved your skin, I bet she would have saved you a second time if dash. He couldn't take it anymore. Mashireo leaped from the bushes he was hiding in and landed opposite of the 2 people who were arguing. They stopped their bickering and assumed a fighting stance as soon as they heard the rustling in the bushes and saw the figure that emerged from them. It was still dark among the dense vegetation, but he could make out a distinct green color on the girl's hair and some sharp teeth in her mouth that formed a feral smile. She was wearing a simple tracksuit to which the upper part zipper was open, revealing a white shirt underneath that was quite dirty. The other boy was standing taller than her, maybe even taller than him, and looked pretty formidable. His teeth also had a sharp edge to them, and his silver hair and weird eyebrows, along with his aggressive snarl, made him look like a beast. He was wearing shorts and a white tank top that was as equally dirty as the girl's. Another one of you, huh? The girl spat. Don't think we'll make this as easy as before. I'm not here to fight. He simply answered and stood upright, his hands carefree at his sides. That girl, what did she look like? And why the hell should we tell you? She yelled back. I'm looking for my teammate. I think she's the one you're talking about. The girl remained silent and the other boy turned to her as if to ask what they should do. Please, she doesn't have any combat experience. If something were to happen to her can it? We don't know what happened to her. She cut him off, still alert with her fists up. But we do. The other boy questioned. Shut up. He doesn't know that, dumbass. Ojiro grimaced as both of them resumed their pointless shouting match. Where did she go? He finally shouted over them, silencing both of them. They looked at each other silently for a moment. This way. The boy said, pointing towards some broken bushes and tree branches, before running in that direction. Ojiro didn't hesitate and followed him, not sparing the girl a glance. Tetsu, by the way. The boy introduced himself after a while. Mashireo Ojiro. He replied and silence fell upon them again. You've got one hell of a teammate there. Tetsu resumed. She jumped to save us without a second thought. Really? Ojiro was surprised. He didn't expect Komori to do something like that. From what he had observed, she was rather shy and timid. Imagining her jumping into danger didn't really fit her personality. Maybe she had hidden courage all along? He wouldn't know, he had only met her today. Yep, I was there. Tetsu laughed. She really saved our skins. Too bad that other girl can't appreciate it. You don't know each other? Nah, we were actually fighting before we got ambushed. Oh right, we got ambushed by another team. They took both of our headbands, he added bitterly. Who were your opponents? Ojiro asked after a while of silence. The silver-haired boy scrunched his face in concentration, as if thinking about it made his head hurt. Indiscriminate shock. There was some guy with yellow hair. He continued after a pause. He tried to shock me with his quirk, only to realize that I was immune and that he had shocked. He squinted his eyes. Someone with silver hair like mine. Said guy fainted after that and didn't fight anymore. And the yellow hair was also out of it after the shock. Mashireo didn't recall anyone with silver hair in his brief observation of the other teams in the cafeteria, but one person with yellow hair did come to mind. Was there someone with orange hair, too? He asked. Tetsu spaced out in thought before slowly nodding. Yeah, there was this girl with orange hair who could enlarge her fists. She was the one who knocked me out. Mashireo nodded and tried to come up with a plan. Tetsu, meanwhile, was busy looking for any clues on where their attacker had gone. Both boys focused on their task at hand and soon spaced out. Ojiro was devising a battle plan and Tetsu was searching for the enemy team. They were snapped out of their trance by a slow whirring sound that grew louder and louder. Both teens stood back to back, trying to locate the source of the noise. Ojiro felt his panic rising as he looked around, but saw nothing. Down! Tetsu shouted, pushing his temporary ally to the ground and following him. They barely dodged a small and fast disc-like object that would have hit them if they hadn't moved. The disc crashed into a tree instead, breaking it and scattering its parts everywhere. They know. Mashireo stated, to which the other boy nodded. They got up and sprinted towards the direction the disc had come from. Indiscriminate shock. A voice yelled from the bushes. Tetsu knocked Mashireo away again and to his astonishment, the boy's skin turned a reflective silver, starting from his arms and spreading to his whole body, except for his clothes. Yellow sparks flew from the bushes, but they had no effect on Tetsu. He screamed a battle cry and charged into the bush, only to be sent flying back by a large fist that flung him to Ojiro, who was getting up. They crashed together and hit a tree, making them wince in pain. With speed they got up again, looking ahead of them, looking for the other team. A yellow-haired boy with a black streak in it came out of the bush. He was wearing a yellow tight training suit and his grin showed how much he enjoyed the fight. Next came an orange-haired girl who wore a black GI with an expressionless face. More importantly, 6 headbands were all across her body. 2 on her head and 2 on each of her arms. Kendo. Ojiro. Tetsu snapped his head between him and the girl, then shook it. You stole my points. He blamed. Is that why you're here, Ojiro? To help him get his points back? Itsuka asked in a surprised tone. Ojiro glanced at the steel teen before looking back at her. No, I'm searching for my teammate. She's small and has long brown hair. Ah, her. Yes, we have her. You can have her back if you want. She let her gaze wander towards Tetsu. That is, if your friend stops following us. No way. I want my points back. Tetsu protested, looking ready to charge at them again. If we knock them out, we can get your teammate without their help. If that's how you want to play it, then be my guest. The yellow-haired boy started to say, but was silenced by Kendo. I don't know what's gotten into you, Kaminari. Ever since your last shock, you've been acting more and more like Kamakiri. It's because that guy sees me off. And it's not like you're a saint. Kaminari yelled back. You know what, I don't care. He continued, before charging at Tetsu, who yelled in joy and ran towards him as well. Mashireo turned his attention to Kendo again. Listen, I just want my teammate back, Kendo. I don't want to fight. Kendo merely took a fighting stance. I can understand Kaminari more and more. You really PSS me off right now. Mashireo looked slightly confused, not understanding why his friend was acting that way. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to think before a fist came crashing down on him, which he dodged to the right at the last second, leaving a serious crater. Kendo! That could have seriously injured me. He exclaimed in shock, only to dodge another fist that came down. Shut up! Was the only thing that Kendo screamed as a reply, before attacking again and again and again. Each time becoming more violent and deranged. What is going on with you? Mashireo shouted, trying desperately not to fight his friend, who not only continued her attacks but also started to bleed from some places on her fists where she struck the hard ground with sharp stones. What the hell is wrong with you? If you don't stop running away like a coward, I'm going to kill you. Her reply was so shocking to him that he couldn't dodge the last attack, which launched him several feet back, directly into Tetsutetsu's back. Ojiro, something is definitely wrong. The steel boy said in a worried tone. Yeah, I can see that. Kendo is not nearly this aggressive, came the strained reply. I'm not talking about her. Mashireo quickly looked behind him towards Tetsutetsu's opponent and his breath stopped while his eyes widened in horror. Thanks to Izuku, he knew that not only did Kendo's quirk enlarge her fists but it also strengthened their durability, making her able to hit a lot harder and even shield attacks with them. Kaminari's quirk, whatever it might be, clearly didn't have that effect on his fist. Swollen and mangled, it oozed a sickly stream of blood. The skin was torn and shredded in places, revealing raw, reddened tissue underneath. Several fingers protruded at odd angles, their bones visibly shattered and disjointed. The deranged smile on his face was juxtaposed against this grotesque sight, a sinister grin that seemed right at home amid the carnage he let his body endure. Every movement should have sent fresh waves of agony through his hand, yet his expression betrayed a perverse delight in the pain he was inflicting upon himself. Is that the best you've got? I can't even feel a thing. A closer look would reveal streaks of blood even on his visage, his smile marred by a missing tooth, to which Ojiro frowned at Tetsutetsu. I had no choice, his ally retorted swiftly. That guy wouldn't have stopped pummeling me, even if his own fist had shattered to dust. Hey, fix those eyes on me, monkey. Mashireo snapped his attention back to Kendo, met with a feral scowl etched deeply into her features. If you don't start taking this fight seriously, I'll turn your corpse into pasta. A cold shiver of intimidation coursed down Ojiro's spine, a stark reaction to the raw force behind his friend's coarse words, and he soon found himself standing back-to-back with Tetsutetsu once more, neither eager nor willing to continue the battle. What was once a somewhat nice clearing amidst the thick forest trees had evolved into a giant battlefield. Littered all around were broken trees and craters, with bushes stomped to paste and some trees even uprooted. Responsible for this carnage was none other than Itsuka Kendo, utilizing her quirk to the best of her abilities, relentlessly smashing her adversary into a fine paste. This adversary happened to be her friend Mashireo Ojiro, who found himself unwillingly locked in combat against her. Snap out of it, Kendo, he yelled in frustration. This cat-and-mouse game had dragged on for far too long. He had no clue what was going on with his friend, but he was convinced that something wasn't right in her head at the moment. Indiscriminate shock. Ojiro heard with half an ear, pinpointing the source immediately. His relief was palpable that Tetsutetsu was by his side. He was certain he couldn't fend off both of them without inflicting serious harm, mirroring the damage they were attempting to impose on him. A strained grunt of pain emanated from the silver-haired boy. Ordinarily, electricity wouldn't even tickle him, but constantly maintaining his quirk had drained his energy rapidly. Currently, only about 70% of his body was shielded by the steel that would normally mitigate harm. A maniacal laughter erupted from Kaminari's lips. Ha 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 ha. Is that all you've got? Better to die than let a weakling like you roam this planet irk. His taunting was abruptly cut short by a steel-covered right hook from Tetsutetsu. Shut up and stay down, the teenager screamed in a blend of anger and concern. The other boy's body was launched several meters before crashing onto the unforgiving ground. Hee 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 ah ha 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 ha. Tetsutetsu uttered a curse under his breath upon witnessing Kaminari rise once again. What on earth is wrong with you? He was absolutely justified in his bewilderment. Kaminari's body appeared utterly battered, his adversary far outmatching him in physical prowess. Despite this, he rose yet again. His hands were now openly bleeding, his mouth not merely missing a single tooth, and his once yellow training suit marred by splotches of dirty brown. Tetsutetsu was fairly certain he had broken one or more ribs in his fury, yet he persisted in standing tall. Wrong with me? I should blarg. A stream of vomit, tainted with blood, surged forth from the teen in the midst of his words, staining his training suit in his own crimson. Tetsutetsu could only gape in a blend of horror and disgust. All right. Points don't matter anymore, you win, man. Just let me call a nurse. He hurriedly manipulated his watch, attempting to summon a nurse who would hopefully arrive in time. Almost instantly after his plea, Kaminari's body crumpled like a marionette with severed strings, collapsing onto the ground. A nurse bot will promptly reach your location. The process will not exceed a few minutes. The robotic voice from his watch offered reassurance, prompting Tetsutetsu to exhale a sigh of relief before recollecting that he was not alone. Swiftly turning his attention, he found his new teammate sprawled bloodied on the ground, with the girl poised to deliver a crushing blow. No, stop. We surrender, he shrieked, sprinting toward both of them. Remarkably, as soon as the words escaped him, the girl's stance wavered, her colossal hands, once poised to crush Ojiro, faltering uncertainly. It culminated in their abrupt collapse behind her, her body following suit. With a resounding thump, she lay supine, utterly unconscious. The precise reason for her sudden cessation at his command eluded Tetsu, yet relief flooded over him regardless. Kneeling swiftly beside Ojiro, he assessed the damage, only to discover him fully aware. His breathing came heavily, his visage smeared with blood of unknown origin, and his attire smudged and soiled. Nevertheless, he was intact. "Is it over?" he whispered faintly. Rather than replying, the silver-haired boy allowed himself to crumple, reclining beside Ojiro. Heh. He. He. What commenced as a leisurely chuckle from Tetsu, joined by Ojiro, burgeoned into an uproarious laughter, akin to Kaminari's earlier mirth. The two of them persisted in their laughter, even as the nurse bots arrived, tending to Kaminari before conveying him away. "You sure you don't want one?" Tetsu asked for the 5th time, holding out a headband toward Mashireo, who was busy using Tetsu's shirt to tie up Kendo's legs. "No, I'm not here for points. Yet. And I can't take them anyway, remember? I'm on a team," Mashireo quickly replied while focusing on securing Kendo's legs with his own shirt. "Yeah, but it doesn't feel right if I'm the only one taking them," Tetsu responded with the same answer as before. Mashireo just sighed. "Listen, if you really want, you can meet up with my team and give the headband to Izuku. He can use it." Tetsu's determined smile in response was intense. "Okay, looks like we're teaming up a little longer." "Not a problem," Mashireo added with a smile, impressed by Tetsu's earlier display of combat skills. His smile disappeared abruptly when he heard Kendo stirring. They both jumped a few meters away into fighting stances, watching in silence as Kendo slowly regained consciousness. What happened?" she mumbled groggily before her eyes widened in horror as she looked around, realizing she was tied up. "Kendo?" Mashireo called out cautiously. His words seemed to snap her out of her panic as she froze, like a statue in shock. Slowly, her gaze moved upward, her expression stuck in complete and utter disbelief. "Ojiro," she whispered softly before breaking down into tears. Honestly surprised and a bit taken aback by the sudden shift, both teens could only watch in astonishment as the girl who had moments ago been eager to crush him broke down in front of them, apologizing repeatedly. "I'm so sorry. Hick. I'm so sorry." The words were said over and over for about half a minute, leaving the boys just standing there, unsure of how to react. Snapping out of his daze, Mashireo quickly approached her, untying her restraints in a hurry. Tetsu stood awkwardly by, feeling a bit out of place, as the girl enveloped his temporary teammate in a tight, emotional hug. After a few minutes of Kendo gradually calming down, Mashireo managed to free himself from her grasp, his shoulder now damp. Kendo used her sleeves to wipe away the last traces of tears on her cheeks, saying, I don't know what got into us. Trying to kill us, that's what," Tetsu muttered under his breath. Mashireo did his best to further comfort her, saying, "It's okay, Kendo. I can tell you didn't mean it." "I hope," he added cautiously. "Absolutely not," she quickly reassured, getting back on her feet, which mildly surprised the other teenager. "I was so angry for no reason," she explained, earning a nod of reassurance from Mashireo and a raised eyebrow of curiosity from Tetsu. I don't mean to alarm you, but I'm still looking for my teammate." "Oh, right. Come on, I'll help you," she said, gesturing for them to follow. Both of them, albeit one somewhat reluctantly, complied. The three of them strolled leisurely through the forest, each lost in their own thoughts. Mashireo was busy mulling over his fight and how he had been easily defeated. Kendo was also lost in contemplation, focusing more on her own state of mind than anything else. And as for Tetsu, Kaminari Denki has arrived at the medical tent. Team Kendo loses one member. A mechanical voice came out of Kendo's watch, gaining her attention. Kendo," the silver-haired boy cautiously spoke. Her nod indicated her attention was on him now. "About your teammate, Kaminari." "I'm sorry," he awkwardly expressed his regret for how badly he had roughed up her teammate. No, it's okay. He was acting crazy like me during the fight. I only met him today in the cafeteria, but he seemed a lot more composed than what you saw, so again, I apologize for earlier, for the both of us," she said, offering another apology. "It's fine, really. No one got." He stopped suddenly, remembering something. Blurg. An awkward silence hung over the group, noticed only by Kendo as Mashireo was too lost in thought to sense the change in atmosphere. "Are you okay, Tetsu?" she asked with concern after he abruptly halted mid-sentence. Yeah. I'm good," he dismissed. The rest of the walk continued in silence until the trio eventually reached a clearing. You can come out, they're allies, she called out loudly into the bushes. In response to her words, 2 more individuals emerged from the surrounding vegetation. One was another silver-haired boy, similar to Tetsu's hair, although he was more chubby, wearing a tracksuit resembling the one worn by the girl Mashireo had met earlier. The other person had a unique mutation, with blade-like appendages sprouting from his cheeks. His green hair and unusual head shape gave him an insect-like appearance. Ojiro and Tetsu, meet Shota and Kamakiri. Shota and Kamakiri, this is Ojiro and Tetsu, she introduced the groups to each other. Who are they? Shota asked with concern. Why does this guy have our headbands? Kamakiri's voice boomed, his surprise mingled with accusation. In short, they defeated us both, and Kaminari needed medical attention. That means we're on our own now, Kendo quickly explained, locking eyes intensely with Kamakiri. Yeah, we've also got the message from our watches. Confirmed Shota. You got beaten? Surprise was evident on Kamakiri's face, his eyes narrowing as if searching for any sign of deception. Kendo simply nodded. Tisk, was Kamakiri's only response. Mashireo interjected, his tone slightly awkward. My, teammate. Kendo turned her attention toward him once more, her voice apologetic. I'm sorry. She then offered an explanation, addressing her team members. You see, Ojiro here is a friend of mine, and the girl we've been bringing with us is his teammate. Kamakiri briefly retreated into the foliage before re-emerging, accompanied by another figure. A palpable sense of relief spread across Ojiro's countenance as his eyes fell upon his missing comrade. Let go now, said figure yelled towards her captor. Kamakiri complied, relinquishing his grip on her hands that he had held captive, his demeanor remaining disinterested. The girl, taken aback by the abrupt turn of events, stumbled down onto her knees, her body unprepared for the sudden release. Fortunately, Mashireo was quick to react, extending his arms to catch the falling girl just in time. Komori! Mashireo exclaimed, his voice infused with palpable relief. There was a pause from the newly arrived figure as she stared blankly at him. Who? Mashireo directed his gaze downward, his attention fixed on the girl nestled within his arms. As he examined her features more closely, a moment of stunned realization washed over him. While her hair bore a striking resemblance in color and style to that of Komori's, there were distinct deviations that set her apart. Unlike Komori, her hair wasn't covering her eyes, and his teammate also didn't have a constant blush on her cheeks. He also couldn't help but notice, a bit embarrassed, that her figure was feeling appreciably more endowed than what he remembered from their escape of that monster. In his shock he abruptly let go of her and without anything to support her the girl fell face first into the ground. Smooth. Kamakiri commented. I'm really sorry. Mashireo apologized once again to the girl who introduced herself as Uraraka Ochako. Uraraka's blush deepened as she felt a bit bashful about the repeated apologies. Don't worry, it's okay. It didn't hurt that much, she reassured him once more. Kendo couldn't help but experience a sense of déjà vu. So, what's the deal? She's not your teammate? Tetsu questioned, a clear expression of confusion on his face. Ojiro simply shook his head. No, Komori has her hair covering her eyes and doesn't have Uraraka's blush. A faint blush appeared on Ojiro's cheeks as he recalled another distinction. Well, I was pretty sure she was your teammate. I mean, small with brown hair, Tetsu remarked, gesturing vaguely in her direction. I'm not that small, Uraraka pouted in response. Mashireo let out a sigh and laid down, feeling a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. One teammate was still missing, and they had no leads on her whereabouts. He couldn't help but wonder why they hadn't come up with a plan for such a situation, like what to do if they got separated. Should he venture to the meeting point on his own? But what if Komori was actually safe and waiting somewhere for him? The whole situation was wearing him down. So, what's the plan now? Tetsu directed his question toward the prone form of Mashireo. Are we going to keep searching for your friend? Mashireo let out a defeated sigh. We don't have many options at this point. He got to his feet, brushing off stray grass that clung to his shirt. The problem is, that was my only lead. It doesn't make sense, the area I discovered earlier was like a battlefield, covered in mushrooms, he pondered aloud. Battleground? Shota's confusion was evident. I don't want to diminish your skills, he turned toward Tetsu, but when we encountered those two earlier, it didn't exactly look like a battleground at the end. Maybe there were a few snapped branches or bushes, at most. Yeah, but there were craters everywhere. Mashireo's gaze shifted toward Kendo, who blushed under his scrutiny. Look, I still don't understand what happened earlier, but usually, I control my attacks to avoid leaving craters. Maybe we should revisit that location? We still have His teammate checked his watch, 4 hours and 40 minutes left on the clock. Masahiro nodded in agreement. Before you go, could I maybe go with you? Uraraka, who had remained quiet until now, looked up with a hopeful expression. She gestured slightly to her left, where Kamakiri stood, his disinterested demeanor unchanged. Don't you have a team? Ojiro asked, his surprise evident. Oh, sorry, that came out wrong. He quickly added. Uraraka sighed softly, her voice tinged with a hint of regret. It's okay, really. The truth is, nobody needed me anymore. I was so conflicted about which team to join that there wasn't a spot left for me anywhere. She spoke with a touch of self-consciousness. Tetsu, with a bright smile, interjected energetically. Why not join my team then? I guarantee we'll be the manliest team around. Uraraka's eyes widened. Manly? But I'm a girl. Tetsu's enthusiasm remained undeterred. Being the manliest goes beyond gender. As Masahiro stifled a chuckle at Tetsu's attempt to convince Uraraka to join his team, Kendo approached him and tapped his shoulder. It looks like we're going separate ways now. Sorry for not finding your teammate, Kendo expressed regretfully. No need to apologize. It's all right. Good luck with the rest of the exam, Masahiro replied. Same to you, Kendo called out as she and her remaining teammate swiftly departed, presumably on a quest to find an exit from the forest. Waving his friend off, he turned towards his own temporary team for the moment, seeing both of them still in a heated debate. Will being manly really make me stronger? Uraraka inquired with a sense of curiosity. Even better, it'll make you a more manly person. Uraraka seemed a bit puzzled. But how do you become manly? It's simple. By just being manly. Masahiro found himself unable to contain his chuckle. Okay, let's not get too caught up in that. Come on, we need to hurry. We only have 4 hours left. It must be here somewhere, Ojiro murmured and led the trio through the forest. Uraraka had kindly been given permission to join their group in the search. Ojiro's voice sounded full of certainty as he pointed ahead. There. He pointed to a broken tree trunk and quickened his pace, soon leading them to the familiar battlefield he had stumbled upon earlier. Tetsu's astonishment was palpable. Wow, now that's what I call a battlefield. Uraraka nodded enthusiastically, her approval evident. The clearing was characterized by massive trees that had been uprooted seemingly effortlessly, craters of considerable size scattered throughout, and an array of clearly non-native fungi sprouting from the ground, trees, and various surfaces. Masahiro's mind was still struggling with the question that had been plaguing him: who could have abducted Komori, and for what reason? It remained a mystery. The thought of one participant attacking another without a headband seemed strange to him, unless he simply wanted to pick a fight. A realization occurred to him. Uraraka, do you know why Kendo's team took you? He inquired, turning to the cheerful girl who was currently crouching in front of a mushroom patch, apparently contemplating a taste. Well, Uraraka began, placing her finger thoughtfully against her cheek. Actually, they never really told me why. They just dragged me along, and, they threatened to beat me up if I didn't cooperate. She was shaking, a hint of fear in her voice. Suddenly Tetsu appeared in front of her, 2 mushrooms between his teeth, producing an exaggerated grin reminiscent of a saber-toothed tiger. His tongue hung out in a playful grimace. Caught off guard, Uraraka stumbled backwards and landed on the floor, laughing at the comical sight of Tetsu. Tetsu wore a grin of his own, his demeanor warm and friendly. You should laugh more, it suits you, he remarked, his grin transitioning into a kind-hearted smile. Uraraka's laughter abruptly ceased, and she turned away from Tetsu. Really, she stammered, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Absolutely. Your laughter is like, super manly. Tetsu enthusiastically declared, prompting a snort from Masahiro at Uraraka's somewhat bewildered expression. However, Masahiro quickly redirected his focus back to the battlefield. Hey, Tetsu. Actually, you guys can just call me Tetsu, he interjected cheerfully. Tetsu, then, Masahiro continued, did you have your fight with Kendo here? Tetsu appeared momentarily taken aback before he scanned their surroundings with a growing sense of recognition. Confusion lingered on his face before a spark of realization illuminated his features. Yeah, that girl and I fought here before we were ambushed. I can tell you for sure that it didn't look like this before or after our fight. Masahiro's curiosity persisted. Do you think your fight was loud? Huh? I get it. Uraraka exclaimed, her fist meeting her open palm with emphasis. If our fight was loud enough to attract attention, maybe Masahiro's teammate came to investigate. Perhaps after we left, she emerged from hiding, and someone else who had been drawn by the commotion took her. She concluded, her expression proud. Ojiro affirmed her deduction. Exactly what I was thinking, he confirmed, causing Uraraka's cheeks to puff up with pride. But who? Tetsu questioned, his brow furrowed as he mentally revisited Uraraka's explanation. Yeah, I haven't come across anyone or any team capable of causing this much destruction, except for Kendo's, Uraraka mused. Ojiro's blood ran cold, a creeping sense of dread settling in his stomach. His complexion turned pale, and a chilling realization dawned on him. I did. Kanoko had always been someone who preferred not to interfere in the private lives of others. This tendency had been present throughout her life, even in middle school. She paid little attention to the various rumors that circulated around the school. This was not necessarily a conscious decision, rather it seemed that she was paid little attention in return. This feeling of being overlooked or underestimated may have contributed to her lack of interest in delving into the affairs of others. As the echo of loud cries and screams reached Kanoko's ears, she found herself in a moment of indecision. The instinct to drop the non-poisonous berries she had picked and quickly retreat to the safety of Ojiro's presence was incredibly tempting. After all, it seemed the most logical decision to seek refuge with her teammate in the face of potential danger. But a strange force held her back and prevented her from turning away immediately. It was as if an invisible hand was holding her in place and urging her on a different path. Despite the lure of safety, Kanoko felt an unexpected wave of curiosity rise within her. Perhaps it was the novelty of the situation or the desire to break out of her usual caution. At that moment, a hint of courage flared up in Kanoko, even if it felt ill-planned and ill-considered. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, she decided to face the unknown rather than hide from it. Step by step she ventured closer to the source of the turmoil, her heart racing with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. She didn't know what to expect when she stumbled across the noisy situation and watched a teenager with silver hair fight against another girl. But what surprised her was that both sides were wearing headbands. She briefly considered waiting to take advantage of the situation, but then remembered that she couldn't wear a headband, and she wasn't confident that she could beat either of them alone, even if they were tired. The guy could turn his body into steel, which would hit him really hard. Even without his quirk, he could probably knock her out with one punch. And the girl, though she didn't look as strong as the guy, used her quirk to break her body into smaller pieces that she presumably could control with her mind. She used her levitating hands and feet to confuse and beat the other guy. None of that mattered, because just as the silver-haired man was about to deliver a decisive blow, 3 more people came out of the forest and entered the clearing where the two were fighting. The fighters immediately turned their attention to the newcomers. What followed was a striking shift in the balance of fairness. The girl and the boy reluctantly joined forces and decided not to attack each other for the time being. The trio that had just arrived, however, showed remarkable teamwork. A mutant with green hair and blade-like appendages growing from his body attacked the silver-haired boy relentlessly, forcing him to constantly use his own quirk to avoid being cut to pieces. The other girl found herself cornered by the duo. She did try to escape by splitting herself into smaller pieces, but her efforts were quickly thwarted when one of her attackers enlarged his hands and swatted the airborne pieces like pesky flies. After one opponent went down, attention quickly shifted and a colossal fist slammed into the steel-skinned man's back, hurling him against a tree and knocking him unconscious. The attackers might have successfully seized their headbands had it not been for the sudden appearance of a brown-haired girl who intervened and stopped them. Kanoko looked behind her and saw only darkness and trees. A sigh of relief escaped her, knowing that no one would ambush her from that direction. What really surprised her, however, was that the attackers had disappeared when she turned her gaze back. The broken path with the destroyed vegetation remained, but the people themselves had seemingly vanished into thin air. Emerging from her hiding place, Kanoko carefully scanned the surroundings and found it disconcerting that the attackers had seemingly vanished into thin air. There you are. Her heart skipped a beat, and her gaze darted to the source of the voice. Another figure stood before her, a bird-like head with dark feathers staring directly at her. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and matching trousers, had a hood tied around his waist and his boots were firmly anchored in the earth beneath him. Although Kanoko struggled to place the voice, only a sense of fear dominated her thoughts and overshadowed any attempt to recognize it. So you didn't have a headband, he remarked with a hint of disappointment. At last Kanoko made the connection. With a trembling finger, she pointed at him, her voice shaking. You're the one who's been chasing us. Observant, he confirmed with a hint of sarcasm. A quality both valuable and uncommon in most people I have met. Fumikage Tokoyami, he introduced himself. Before Kanoko could say anything back, a shadowy figure emerged from Fumikage's belly, expanding and becoming a black figure. Its head resembled Fumikage's, with claw-like hands, and its lower part remaining connected to Fumikage. Fumi, the apparition, whined childishly. Stop pretending to be so cool and get to the point. Its voice had a pleading tone, as if it had heard Tokoyami's speech countless times before. Enough, Dark Shadow, came the reply. Our opponent hasn't even introduced herself yet. That didn't stop you from attacking them earlier, it retorted angrily, provoking a response from the boy. Need I remind you that we chased them away because you insisted? He glared at Dark Shadow, daring it to deny his words. Ugh, he conceded. Fine, do what you want, but hurry up. With that, he retreated into Fumikage and gave a final wave to the still motionless Kanoko. Apologize, Dark Shadow acts independently, he said, addressing her. Kanoko remained silent, unsure how to respond. It didn't seem to bother him and he continued speaking without waiting for her reply. I must also apologize. Going after you and your teammate was unwarranted. Speaking of your teammate, where is he? He asked. Kanoko remained frozen, unable to answer because she was shocked. The silence stretched on, making Tokoyami increasingly uneasy. He wasn't sure if the unease was coming from him or from her. No need to worry, she managed to say, finally regaining her voice after processing the information Tokoyami had just shared. His nod of acknowledgement helped dispel the uneasy feeling that had settled between them. Tokoyami then asked another question, are you in a team? Or just a duo, perhaps with an opening? Sorry, she stammered, still uncertain, we're already full. She replied, unsure of how he would react to the news. A shame, he sighed before turning around. Nevertheless, I wish, before he could finish, Dark Shadow reappeared. Are we done? It asked, its voice tinged with exhaustion. Yes, we're done, Tokoyami replied curtly, the slight increase in his tone betraying his frustration. Farewell. He continued walking back in the direction he had come from. Oh, what do we have here? A new voice spoke up, causing Kanoko to instinctively back up in the direction of Tokoyami, who had also turned around to face the newcomers. Or rather, two figures emerged from the forest into the clearing, one of them slightly hunched over in posture. The person in front was of average height, with short blonde hair. Neatly combed to the right, causing his bangs to hang over his right eye. His eyes were periwinkle blue with white pupils, slanting downwards towards the sides of his face. His eyes were half closed, and he had a smirk and a head tilt that gave him a somewhat disdainful appearance, wearing an open jeans jacket and matching shorts that completed his outfit. One headband was on his head, one tied to his right arm. The other person didn't seem to pay them much attention, giving only a brief side glance before appearing more interested in the grass. This boy, also of average height, had small eyebrows and red eyes. His slightly open mouth revealed sharp teeth, forming what looked like an expression of displeasure. Most notably, his red hair was spiked in various directions, giving him a striking appearance. He wore a red tracksuit, which Kanoko thought was a bit too much red, and paired it with white shoes, giving him a somewhat intimidating look. Two headbands were tied to his left arm and one to his right. Come on, Manoma, they don't even have headbands, the red-haired boy spoke, shooting a glance at his partner. Manoma, now known by the name he had given them, visibly winced. You know, Kirishima, I do wonder if you're really aiming to win this exam, Manoma retorted, giving his own defiant look despite their similar heights. Who are both of you? A voice beside Kanoko inquired, causing her to jump slightly and turn to find Tokoyami now standing next to her. More importantly, what do you want from us? The two arguing teens stopped their squabble and shifted their attention back to the pair. I'm Nito Manoma, and this is my current partner, Ojiro Kirishima. The blonde introduced, gesturing to himself and his companion. We don't really want anything from you, except perhaps a kind request for you to step down from the exams, he stated matter-of-factly. This time, both Kanoko and Tokoyami displayed outward expressions of displeasure, their brows furrowing. And why should we do that? Tokoyami inquired further. As you may have heard from Present Mike during the question round of his explanation, even if you manage to acquire the required number of headbands too, in our case there's still a chance that we might not pass, Manoma explained. Kirishima let out a sigh, and both Kanoko and Tokoyami grasped the direction he was headed. But if many participants were to withdraw from the exams, the chances of being accepted with the required amount to even be considered passing would increase, he elaborated. His gaze was primarily on Tokoyami. Surely, you can deduce where I'm going with this. I can, Tokoyami replied succinctly, his gaze shifting towards Kanoko. She could read the determination in his eyes. It was evident that he had no intention of giving up, he had come too far for that. He seemed to be gauging her own resolve, silently seeking to know if she stood by his side or not. If Kanoko were on her own, she might have considered accepting Manoma's request. She could have found a reason to withdraw from the exams, perhaps feeling disheartened and potentially disappointing her family, but at least she'd have a reason. However, she knew that she couldn't face this challenge alone, not with her quirk or her skills. She simply couldn't do it alone. And that's why she nodded. Her nod was directed at Fumikage, a silent acknowledgement of her decision. She couldn't go through with it on her own, but she wasn't alone. She couldn't abandon her team, especially after they had put their trust in her. She couldn't leave them behind. That's why she nodded. I understand. Monoma sighed, not requiring verbal confirmation of their decision. He knew that many people placed great value on words, despite the old saying that action spoke louder. He found himself in a similar mindset. Opinions were one thing, people could express them and receive praise, but standing firm behind those opinions when the going got tough was what truly mattered. That's why he wasted no time in sprinting towards them, aiming to swiftly incapacitate both of them so that the nurse bot could attend to them, hopefully without causing any injuries. Kirishima followed closely behind Monoma, just a split second slower in his reaction. Monoma inwardly clicked his tongue. His partner still needed to refine his observational skills if he hadn't noticed the determination in their opponent's eyes, a determination that left no room for surrender. However, such details hardly mattered in the grand scheme of things. Kirishima's quirk was more than adequate for the task at hand, sufficient for both of them, especially after his generous offer to allow him to freely copy it during the exams, a gesture Monoma reassured clearly applied only for the duration of the exams. Observing the slight smudges of dirt on their clothes and bodies, Monoma deduced that they hadn't engaged in combat yet. This suggested an affiliation between them. It made sense to pair someone with a potent offensive quirk with another who had a supportive one. The brown-haired girl seemed more inclined toward support, while the mutant teen appeared to be a formidable physical combatant. He was proven correct as a black entity emerged from the boy's abdomen, intercepting Monoma's intended attack against the girl. Monoma scrutinized the dark appendage and discerned distinct claws at one end. A summoning-type quirk, he mused, a genuine spark of intrigue lighting up his eyes. He had a soft spot for quirks he couldn't copy, there was something uniquely captivating about them. His intrigue quickly transformed into excitement as the claws shifted and took aim at him. Fortunately, the new quirk he had recently copied seemed tailor-made for this very situation. He mimicked the hand gesture he had observed from the previous user, forming his hands into a square shape and taking a deep breath. As he exhaled forcefully through the square, the air surrounding it began to shimmer and expand, growing larger in response to his breath until an invisible barrier materialized. Monoma knelt on one knee, taking in deep breaths as he recovered from the exertion. Now I understand why he lost, he admitted with a wry smile, recognizing that his limited mastery of newly copied quirks was likely a contributing factor. Given the constraints of his copied quirk, Monoma concluded that its original user could probably create no more than 5 constructs in an hour. His control over the newly copied quirk was swiftly put to the test as the approaching hand crashed forcefully into the invisible wall he had conjured. The impact generated a resounding sound and halted the attack momentarily. However, it didn't take long for the wall to display signs of stress, developing cracks that expanded until it ultimately shattered. Monoma had anticipated this outcome and swiftly stepped a few meters away as a contingency plan. Meanwhile, Kirishima was on the offensive, opting to engage Tokoyami instead of the girl. Fumikage quickly seized the opportunity to question Komori about her quirk, as her initial shock from the surprise attack began to wane. "What's your quirk?" Fumikage inquired urgently. Komori, still recovering from the ambush, took a moment to respond, her voice somewhat shaky. "I can emit spores that rapidly grow into mushrooms. However, I can't control their precise placement." She trailed off, her tone carrying a hint of regret as she acknowledged the limitations of her ability more than ever. "We'll adapt and use it to our advantage," Fumikage decided, quickly formulating a strategy based on her quirk's capabilities. As his sprint continued, Kirishima found himself reflecting on his decision to ally with Monoma. He couldn't help but admit that joining forces with him might not have been the wisest choice. He had grown increasingly disheartened by their tactics, which he likened to tax collectors crushing the spirits of others for their own benefit. Monoma's argument was that not everyone they had encountered had surrendered willingly and fought. Still, Kirishima couldn't shake the feeling that their approach was unjust, especially when he considered the unwavering determination of those who resisted. He remembered Monoma's earlier advice about action speaking louder than words, particularly in relation to his straightforward fighting style and planning. Kirishima couldn't help it. He wasn't much of a thinker in the first place, and in the fights they were engaged in, instincts took over him mostly. Monoma's sincere admiration for Kirishima became evident through his words. His repeated use of the term manly, something he quickly understood resonated with Kirishima, carried genuine meaning. Monoma recognized the strength in Kirishima's unwavering determination, his resolute stance against opponents, and his steadfast belief in his own ideals. The notion of being manly extended beyond mere bravado. It symbolized a deep commitment to one's beliefs and values, even when faced with adversity. Kirishima found resonance in Manoma's perspective of it. After all, every participant in this exam was striving to prove their worthiness of becoming heroes. Their beliefs were put to the test in this clash, and their determination to fight for those beliefs was a testament to their true heroic spirit. For Kirishima, the decision to stay and face the challenge head-on wasn't just a matter of passing the exam. It was about honoring his convictions and proving to himself that he was capable of standing his ground in the face of opposition. This understanding fueled his resolve to continue fighting, guided by the trust he had placed in Manoma's guidance. That's why he stayed, and that's why when Manoma yelled to dodge to the right where the giant hand was coming at him, he didn't hesitate a second. He trusted him. Tokoyami's surprise was obvious as he watched the course of events. The calculated risk Kirishima took under Manoma's guidance showed a level of confidence that amazed Tokoyami. The fact that Kirishima had thrown himself into danger without hesitation, based solely on Manoma's instruction, indicated a strong bond between the two that went beyond mere cooperation. In contrast, Kanoko's confusion was palpable. Unfamiliar with combat tactics, she found it difficult to understand the reasons behind Kirishima's actions. The thought of deliberately putting herself in danger, even under the guise of a strategic move, troubled her. "Komori, you need to run behind Dark Shadow's attack," Tokoyami's voice cut through the tense air. Kanoko's gaze flicked towards him, hoping this was a joke. Her mind raced as she processed the situation. The directive seemed counterintuitive, moving towards the threat rather than away from it. But Tokoyami's plea for trust convinced her, pushing her past her initial confusion. She took a deep breath, drawing strength from his unwavering gaze. With a determined nod, Kanoko's uncertainty transformed into resolve. She began to move, her initial steps cautious as she processed the risk. Manoma's mind raced as he watched Kanoko's unexpected movement. Her decision to follow Tokoyami's instruction threw him off balance for a moment. Had his plan been too transparent? He knew his opponents were not stupid, they would not fall for a simple diversion so easily. But Manoma was no fool either. He had encountered his fair share of naive opponents during the chaotic start of the exams, when the park had become a living illustration of the concept of free for all. None of them would have guessed that Manoma had a carefully calculated strategy at play. As he watched Kanoko's progress, several scenarios ran through Manoma's mind. If she indeed had a support quirk, then her behavior could have deeper implications. Was she trying to bait him with an attack while Tokoyami prepared a counterattack? Or maybe her quirk had an unexpected offensive ability that could surprise them. Not that it mattered much at this point, because it was clear that the other teenager had seen through his plan. They were well aware that Manoma was pursuing a strategy, and it seemed that their own countermove was already in motion. Manoma's grin only widened at this realization. The challenge of the situation only fueled his determination. He looked forward to the thought that their victory would be all the more satisfying knowing that he had successfully outwitted their opponents. It didn't take long for them to get into action, Kanoko upon stopping her sprint activating her quirk, sprouting mushrooms everywhere. Upon witnessing the girl's quirk in action, Manoma raised an intrigued brow. Initially, he couldn't fathom its combat or supportive potential. However, his perspective shifted as he noticed mushrooms sprouting on Kirishima's hand. Manoma's urgent shout prompted everyone to retreat immediately. The timing proved unfortunate, as Kirishima's attempt to withdraw was met with a powerful swipe from Dark Shadow. The impact sent him hurtling into a nearby tree that splintered into two upon impact. Manoma wasted no time, seizing the moment that presented itself. Capitalizing on the shock visible on the faces of their adversaries, he charged at Tokoyami and Kanoko. Both were too preoccupied, Tokoyami by the unintentional surge of force and Kanoko by Kirishima's unexpected recovery, standing tall as if the incident hadn't affected him. However, that illusion shattered as soon as he brought a hand to rub his sore neck. "Man, that one got me good, huh?" He wasted no time, not allowing his enemy to ponder, before charging in once more. Manoma had anticipated this reaction, knowing that his survival despite serious injuries would shock his opponents. It was a fleeting opportunity, providing a brief moment of bewilderment as the enemy saw him unscathed by their attack. Though such tactics wouldn't suffice against stronger adversaries, it was enough to divert Tokoyami's attention momentarily. The sound of Kanoko's squeak brought him back to reality, his focus shifting to her presence. In that split second, Manoma closed in on her. Reflexively, Tokoyami dispatched Dark Shadow, knowing a barrier was inadequate against Dark Shadow's assault. To his surprise, the blonde had already formed his hands into a mock square, pretending to erect a protective shield. In the end, Monoma's deception came true as he was slammed into another tree. This time, the impact didn't shatter the tree upon contact, yet it must have inflicted considerable pain. Similar to Kirishima's earlier resilience, Monoma rose to his feet once more, displaying an impudent smirk as if the prior events had no impact on him. Before Tokoyami could react, a searing pain in his side caused him to stagger, followed by a punch to his gut that compelled him to recall Dark Shadow. Kirishima had closed the distance yet again, delivering 2 forceful blows. Much to his astonishment, Kirishima abruptly ceased his assault and retreated, vanishing into the deeper forest. Tokoyami eyed the area before sprinting directly at Monoma, Dark Shadow re-emerging. Kanoko, still overwhelmed by the unfolding chaos, could only watch in further bewilderment as Monoma gestured with a finger gun, taking aim directly at Tokoyami. Bang! Tokoyami felt as if a speeding car had collided with him, causing him to involuntarily spit out saliva before being propelled by what seemed like an unseen force deeper into the forest where Kirishima lay in wait. Kanoko felt dread welling up as she watched Tokoyami being effortlessly flung backward by Monoma's single phrase. Had he merely been toying with them all along? Tisk, TSK, Monoma chided, observing Kanoko's despondent expression. Stiffening, Kanoko found herself at a loss for how to proceed. She hadn't signed up for the exams with the intention of fighting, let alone hurting anyone. She didn't want any of this. Why? Monoma's voice cut through the tension, his gaze laser-focused on her with a trace of venom. Why are you here? Uncertainty gripped her. Was he inquiring about her presence in the forest? About fighting him? Or perhaps about her motivations for becoming a hero? Why would you want to become a hero? He belittled the "you" in his question, causing something deep within Kanoko to tremble. She struggled to find an answer. Monoma pressed on, seemingly unperturbed by her hesitation. I've observed your lot, he said with a sickened expression, as if the thought disgusted him. Motivated by money, fame, status, or some noble aspiration of saving people. He spat on the ground and took a step forward, prompting Kanoko to instinctively step back. But you're different, aren't you? His tone dripped with condescension. You're not here out of your own conviction, are you? You're not here because you made a resolute decision to become a hero and save people, or even for personal gain. One step forward, and Kanoko mirrored it with one step back. You're doomed to fail, all of you. I can tell you that now. Kirishima isn't here. Do you know why you're so weak? Why I could have easily defeated you from the start but chose to chat instead? His question was laced with cynicism, as though he already knew her answer would be no. One step forward, followed by one step back. Because you're consumed by the thoughts of others, he declared matter-of-factly. Your entire focus is on appeasing others, first your peers, and now even me. Is that not your mentality? His smug smile persisted. It's noble, but it's foolish. Such a mindset won't lead you anywhere. You won't win this fight, this exam, or bring honor to your team or whoever's responsible for your presence here. One step forward. Make him stop. I can see it. A local hero saves an orphan, only to die in action. He spread his arms wide. The same villain later sets fire to the orphanage. All of it could have been prevented if only you were more selfish. One step forward. Make him stop. This isn't a battle you can win. You're weak-willed and physically frail. When you obsess over others, you neglect yourself. In this world, neglecting yourself leads to nowhere. One step forward, and now he stood beside her. Really, you should just make him stop. Make him stop. Why am I here? Make him stop. Make him stop. Why am I here? Make him stop. Make him stop. Why me? Why always me? Make him stop. Make him stop. I'm so useless. Make him stop. Make him stop. Make him stop. Are you all right? It was just a question. A simple, everyday question that usually wouldn't raise an eyebrow. But something within her stirred. Monoma's ranting continued, but Kanoko no longer heard. Are you all right? It echoed again, resonating within her. Something was stirring. Why was she here? How could someone with a seemingly useless quirk be part of this? Fighting? Becoming a hero? With a power as ordinary as growing mushrooms? Her family? Pressuring her to try to join clubs, to try to ask girls for playdates, to try to. Her friends? One name emerged, then another, but neither felt right. No one else came to mind. Are you all right? The question rang louder now, a profound whisper. Her team? Was it pride for her team? Being sought after to join? Manga, merely exchanging names. Midoriya, looking at anything but her. Mashireo. Komori. A loud voice jolted her out of her thoughts. Beside her, Ojiro was seated, the bus still stationary with about 3 minutes left before departure. As she glanced at him, she noticed a look of concern etched onto his face. Are you alright? It seemed more like a polite formality, a question asked in passing, as he already scanned her for any signs of injury. Embarrassment tinged her cheeks. Here. Ojiro was genuinely serious about everything, while she. You know, I'm glad we're going to the site together, he stated warmly, his gaze steady on her. Her blush faded instantly, her attention drawn by the genuine smile on his face. I didn't want to come across as a nervous wreck back there, he continued playfully. Someone had to look like they had all their stuff together, right? His laughter was light, and she tried to recall the interactions they'd had during their break. The moments in the cafeteria seemed somewhat hazy now, mostly remembered as Fukudashi's barrage of questions directed at Midoriya about his quirk, answered with Midoriya's enthusiasm, and Midoriya's own questioning. But as the break progressed, the cafeteria had gradually grown quieter, conversations becoming sparse until the last 10 minutes of the exam, where an oppressive silence hung in the air. Fukudashi's boundless energy appeared to reach its peak, evidenced by the 10th time he stirred his tea. Midoriya didn't fare much better, his nervous glances and muttering indicating his unease. Amidst all this, only Ojiro's smile seemed unwavering, as if he understood what was on everyone's minds. Stop it, you two. You're going to make Komori nervous too if you keep this up, Ojiro remarked, causing Kanoko's cheeks to redden unexpectedly at the sudden attention. Oh? Sorry, Komori, Fukudashi awkwardly apologized. Ojiro chuckled softly, an action that provoked mock anger from Fukudashi, triggering an apparent tussle between them. In response, Midoriya, perceiving Fukudashi's actions as genuine anger, tried to stop Fukudashi, igniting a situation where Ojiro laughed heartily, another boy attempting to strangle him, and Midoriya trying desperately to explain why being a JRK wouldn't hold up as a valid courtroom argument. In the midst of it all, Kanoko couldn't help but let out a small laugh, unaware of the subtle widening of Ojiro's grin. Heh, yeah, Ojiro's voice echoed, snapping her back into the present. As she realized she had audibly chuckled while reminiscing, she quickly averted her gaze, cheeks tinged with a hint of embarrassment. You know, at first, I didn't want to become a hero, Ojiro continued, seemingly undisturbed by her reaction. His response prompted her to look at him once more. It's true, he affirmed, recognizing the doubt in her eyes. I actually wanted to be a martial arts teacher at first. I mean, he scratched his neck with an embarrassed smile. What could I do with this quirk? He gestured toward his tail. I thought, who would want to see a hero with such a lame quirk? Why bother trying? He went on, and Kanoko nearly wanted to interrupt, rejecting the notion that his quirk was anything but amazing. It was useful, strong even, judging by Midoriya's praise. It was far better than. But then Izuku came along. He reminisced with a fond smile. He bombarded me with questions over pizza. How much weight could I lift with it? How precise was my control? Could I spin it fast enough to fly? He chuckled good-naturedly. I'm not entirely certain what changed within me that day. Just a random day, like any other, Izuku's talk about wanting to become a hero. His gaze turned distant, filled with a hint of sadness. Something shifted, I guess, something that tested my resolve. Her throat felt dry. There was an undeniable captivation in his story, as if his words were reaching out for her soul, waiting for her acceptance. What happened? She inquired, her voice just above a whisper. My original resolve shattered, he stated simply, causing Kanoko to gasp softly. And a new one took its place. His eyes locked onto hers once more, intensifying the sensation from before. My dream of becoming a teacher crumbled because a stronger resolve found its way into my heart, and it's remained steadfast ever since. I don't know if it was Izuku's talking or if it was my childish hope of becoming a hero coming back that day full force, but determination radiated from his expression. I will become a hero. He smiled earnestly at her. She found herself thinking it was really nice. It was the same sensation she experienced back then, when Ojiro spoke to her and shared a piece of himself. He shared it with me. At the moment, she didn't comprehend the nature of the feeling. Something stirred beneath her skin, surging toward her right arm. This was a new sensation, akin to a constant push, as if the wind guided her while sailing. It resembled an invisible crowd, a chorus of cheers urging her on, akin to someone's unwavering belief in her. The sensation extended to her fingers, a foreign presence settling within. Kanoko recognized Ojiro's gift now. He had entrusted her with one of the most significant things she had lacked, something she hadn't needed before, hadn't known how it felt. Her fingernails elongated, growing swiftly and unexpectedly sharp, strikingly so. His resolve. But I doubt. Monoma's eyes widened, and he promptly tapped into Kirishima's quirk. In a fraction of a second, his skin toughened and turned stone-like, barely in time to shield against the sharp force that tore at his back before he jumped away. A hidden weapon? An aspect of her quirk he hadn't anticipated? What was this familiar sensation emanating from her? His focus snapped back to her, aghast at the sight before him. The girl, who had initially seemed mushroom-like due to her quirk, was no longer the same. Claws sprouted where fingernails should be, obsidian and hardened like bone. Her lips, once quivering with an inverted smile, twisted grotesquely. The edges of her mouth crumbled away like parched, decaying skin, forming a chillingly wider grin. Yet, most strikingly, her tail emerged from her form, mirroring her attire's hue, extending longer and longer the more he gazed. Her hair seemed to part like opposing magnets, unveiling one of her eyes vertical, with a feral intensity he hadn't seen from her before. Tokoyami found himself dumbfounded by the astonishing durability displayed by his adversary. He counted 16 times now when Dark Shadow had dealt powerful blows that should have sent Kirishima reeling, only to see the boy rise time and time again. Unsurprisingly, Kirishima was on his feet once more, yet Tokoyami's response was more of an expectant nod than genuine surprise. And then, like a repetitive cycle, his opponent stood tall yet again. "Man, you hit pretty hard," Kirishima remarked, his hand rubbing his neck in a gesture that appeared to mock pain. Though Tokoyami outwardly maintained his calm demeanor, a hint of annoyance simmered beneath the surface. His frustration was particularly pronounced because of Dark Shadow. Patience wasn't his forte, and any semblance of patience attributed to him was solely due to his unwavering willpower. And it was that very willpower that was steadily eroding away. Kirishima charged forward once more, but something beyond unwavering determination seemed to flicker in his expression this time: worry. And that very same emotion crept onto Tokoyami's own face, shrouded beneath a carefully composed, judgmental gaze. How long had this relentless battle persisted? How many times had he sent Kirishima hurtling into the forest, only for the boy to rise yet again, propelled even deeper into the shadows? Concern for his temporary ally gnawed at him. Based on their brief interactions, he gathered that she wasn't a fighter, nor did she possess any distinct specialization. In stark contrast, Manoma displayed far superior combat skills in their brief confrontation. But Manoma was still absent. And that raised Tokoyami's apprehensions. If Manoma was out there waiting for his partner, entrusting Kirishima to secure their victory, then why did that flicker of worry mar Kirishima's face? There shouldn't be any danger for him when facing Tokoyami. Kirishima's growing enthusiasm, marked by increasingly exuberant praise for well-placed hits, seemed to suggest so. Just as he was on the verge of making a break for it, returning to the clearing, the sound of heavy footsteps reached his ears, concurrent with Kirishima's battle cry, which abruptly ceased upon the same sound registering in his ears. The footsteps drew closer, carrying a sense of urgency, as though their source was hastening away. Tokoyami felt a surge of near relief, concluding that the girl must have managed to elude Manoma and make her escape. Positioning himself defensively, Tokoyami turned to the side. To his right stood Kirishima, his gaze locked onto the man-made trail they'd left behind. The footsteps approached, hastened, and Tokoyami found himself almost sighing with relief as he surmised that the girl had indeed evaded Manoma's clutches. It was Manoma. Manoma sprinted past a surprised Tokoyami, his focus unwaveringly fixed on Kirishima. The blonde figure was coated in dirt as though he'd taken a tumble through mud, his clothes torn with apparent claw marks etched across them. A panicked expression adorned his face as he raced toward his partner. "Abort," he blurted, and Kirishima didn't require a second prompt. Abandoning the skirmish, he hastened after Manoma, who was already departing. Tokoyami remained rooted in his spot, a mixture of confusion and surprise lingering within him. "What was that?" Dark Shadow voiced, frustration tainting its words. The entity was far from pleased that their adversary had abruptly fled, leaving the engagement unresolved. Another set of footsteps reached his ears, and although he had a vague inkling of whose they might be, he hesitated to accept it. Had he misjudged her entirely? Did she possess some form of martial training or perhaps an unconventional weapon? Or was her quirk vastly different from his initial assumption? Emerging from the undergrowth, Komori stepped into view, her appearance remarkably unscathed. "There you are," she exclaimed with genuine delight, her expression reflecting her relief to find him free from apparent injuries. Tokoyami had an array of certainties in his life. He was certain that birds laid eggs, he was certain that being engulfed in flames was agonizing, he was certain that he disliked the taste of alcohol. Yet, this girl posed an enigma that defied his categorizations. "Are we there yet?" Tetsu's voice emitted a childish whine, his feet surely throbbing with exhaustion by now. The sprint had begun once Mashireo seemingly sensed Komori's location, a feeling that seemed to affect him more than anyone else. While Mashireo appeared reluctant to slow down, he eventually did so, prompted by Uraraka's imploring eyes, despite her insistence that she could continue. "Almost." Mashireo exhaled in response. Ochako's feet screamed in agony. Her meager stamina felt like it was on the brink of collapse. Tetsu, seemingly less worse for wear, albeit with a slightly hunched posture, appeared poised to dash again. Meanwhile, she was almost tempted to ask to be carried, her eyes half shut as she trudged along, utterly fatigued. Right there! Mashireo's voice boomed, and he promptly sprinted ahead, with Tetsu hot on his heels and Uraraka joining in reluctantly. When Mashireo leapt into a sizable bush, both Uraraka and Tetsu halted, uncertain whether to follow suit. Found you, his triumphant shout echoed from the foliage, followed by laughter. Tetsu exchanged a look with Uraraka, who could only shrug in bewilderment. As Tokoyami emerged from his concealment behind a tree, their suspicions were laid to rest. It seemed they were not facing adversaries. Minutes later, after introductions and Ochako's comment on Komori's cuteness, which she fervently denied, only to receive mutual agreement from Tetsu and Ojiro, they finally had the opportunity to recount their own side of the ordeal. All of this felt utterly unnecessary, Mashireo uttered, a touch of whining exhaustion in his tone. I'd say, meeting me made it all worthwhile. Tetsu chimed in, laughing heartily at Mashireo's quizzical expression. I think so too, without you I would probably still be with Kendo's team, so thank you. Uraraka adding her own endorsement. I guess it wasn't entirely terrible, Mashireo mused, but then the ground began to tremble, causing all of them to tumble, desperately clutching onto anything for support. What's happening? Komori's voice quivered as she lay sprawled on the ground, struggling to quell her rising panic. Dark Shadow. Tokoyami's command pierced the air as he fought to maintain his balance. Dark Shadow emerged and shot above the tree canopy, scanning the surroundings. Holy sheet! In the distance where the city area lay, a colossal skyscraper teetered and then toppled, triggering a domino effect that sent another tower crashing down in its wake. They exchanged silent, horrified glances, their shock reverberating through the still air. They remained wordless until Komori spoke up, her gaze locked onto Mashireo, as if transmitting her thoughts through her eyes. Was that the signal? Manga wasn't exactly a poster child for violence. In fact, he was pretty much the opposite, a peace-loving guy. A lot of people could vouch for that. His quirk, while not designed for destruction, could still pack a punch if he smacked someone right into a wall with a perfectly timed BAM sound effect. But seriously, that last jump from him? That was a level of pain he hadn't signed up for. Even now, he had no idea how he managed to hit himself with his own quirk mid-jump. His mom would have called it an impressive achievement, for sure. His dad? Well, he'd just chalk it up to him being a dumbass. Not that his family's input really mattered at this point. Family dynamics wouldn't save him from the mess he was in right now. And that mess involved him getting relentlessly assaulted by a girl with vines for hair. Yeah, she was kind of hot, but she was also trying to tie him up like he was a gift wrap tutorial. And what was with her constant praying or chanting or whatever? It was getting on his last nerve. If she was gonna attack him with those vine things, the least she could do was look him in the eye while she did it. Not like he could show his discomfort. Dude was still stuck running around like a DMN monkey. Was this some kind of hidden camera prank show? Well, yeah, there were hidden cameras, but not the kind he was thinking. He almost wanted to accept it, the new reality of his life, perpetually running, jumping, rolling, and dodging. The park area they were fighting on had turned into a freaking battleground, like a field that had decided to tip over. All it needed were some plants and grapevines everywhere. Speaking of vines, how the heck did the vine-haired girl afford all those hair products with? Well, that kind of hair? Or maybe she used garden products instead? Wait, did garden products even exist for hair? Man, this whole situation was straight up bizarre. The girl's side glare hit him like a ton of bricks, and it was as if she could smell the thoughts he hadn't even spoken out loud. Wait, did he really blurt out that whole hair products thing? Nah, that couldn't be right. He was a ninja at keeping quiet, a skill he'd honed during the thrilling years of middle school. Oh, but then there was his manga panel head. Manga never quite mastered the art of keeping his thoughts hidden from that head of his that was essentially a living manga panel. It was like his panel head had its own mind. The doc claimed the head was somehow organic and not paper. It did feel organic enough, with all the touching he received from curious classmates. Also, according to the doc, that was where his brain lived. Well, after little 6-year-old Manga got his first phone and googled brain sizes and then compared it to his head size, he never quite trusted that doc again. And then, a slight tug at his feet. Oh, shoot. Swearing internally, he tried his best. Seriously, he was like the superhero of evading capture for the majority of the battle. Too bad it counted for zilch at the moment. In what felt like mere seconds, the girl's vines, under her tight control, had cocooned him, wrapping around everything except his head, which displayed a very unamused, sad face. Moral of the story? Trying to outmaneuver a girl with vine hair? Tougher than it sounds. See now that your struggles are in vain? The girl, Ibara Shiozaki, asked coldly. For some reason, Manga's brain provided her name, and he couldn't help but feel that she was the one who was annoyed. He almost burst into laughter, so much so that his manga panel emoticon changed to A. He was actively trying to silence himself, not wanting to worsen his already precarious situation. Listen up, girl. My team's gonna show up any minute now, and then you're in for a world of hurt. It was a complete lie, and he knew it. First off, they'd agreed on a plan, and secondly, he had no clue where the heck he was right now. This park certainly didn't fit the standard definition. Huge open but field would have been a much more accurate name. Much, much better. Not that it mattered much right now, given that the girl remained impassive to his attempts at intimidation. Fine, if she wanted to play it cool, he could play the same game for hours. 10 minutes later, he was thoroughly reconsidering his approach. Please, I'm sorry for calling you, Cactus Face. Please let me go, he whined, feeling suspended in the air for far too long, especially for someone who didn't have a flying quirk. But the cactus-headed girl simply ignored the comment, much like the thousands of other comments she'd probably heard before. No, she replied with a simple, cold denial. That prompted Manga to whine even louder. He could still hear explosions and battle cries in the distance, too far for comfort. Sadly, he couldn't move his head since someone had a death grip on his neck. If only those vines didn't have thorns, things might have been different. Stupid thorns. She already had strong vines, did they really need to be thorny as well? Alright, I give up. What the hell do you even want with me? Manga finally resigned himself, realizing he'd lost track of just how long he'd been hanging in the air. Hopefully not too long, he didn't want his teammates to start a missing persons report. But who was he kidding? They probably thought he'd been gone for ages, and he was still stuck with this girl. I do not like to repeat myself very often, she began, matter-of-factly as if explaining something to a 5-year-old, but since you seem to have sincerely forgotten my request, I shall reiterate once more, I seek companionship. Manga didn't quite grasp the implied insult in her words, so his emoticon just shifted to, I already told you that I'm part of a team. And even if I wanted to leave, which I don't, I'd need my entire team to disband, he shouted angrily at the stronger female. Meanwhile, Shiozaki absorbed this information with a touch of annoyance that she chose to ignore. Several seconds of silence followed before Ibara's face morphed into a shocked expression. Ah, she uttered. What's with that expression? Are you an idiot? Manga couldn't help but retort. Manga's world suddenly plunged into darkness. Wah! I can't see. I'm blind, he screamed in sheer hysteria, struggling against his unseen captor. He felt himself being carried around like a piece of luggage. Silence was his only response. Let me go. Anger symbol. He shouted again, though it was invisible, his emoticon changing in anger. She continued to ignore him, focusing on her path. It wasn't until she slowly halted, another realization dawning on her. Where is your team located? She asked, allowing his head to see the light of day again. Manga, gasping for air and taking deep breaths, turned his now angry gaze toward Ibara. Are you crazy? I could hardly breathe. Manga's words were far from the truth, and Ibara's patience with her future teammate was dwindling. I would very much appreciate no further use of such sinful acts, she said, with a touch of prayer in her voice. Sinful? Sinful. You're the one holding me hostage. Remind me who's the sinful one here. He shouted, two of the same emoticons raging inside his head. Shiozaki recoiled in shock. But I have been nothing but honest with you, she replied, her voice tinged with hurt and disbelief. What the hell is going on with you? He continued to struggle, wiggling his entire body in an attempt to escape her grasp. I can't read you at all. First, you're some stone-cold diva, and the next second, you're a hurt little girl. Pick one and stick with it. His voice reached octaves he didn't know he was capable of, and his volume was also a new record. Another hurt expression crossed Ibara's face, and she tried her best to hold back tears. Manga was left stunned into silence before the vines engulfed his head once more, prompting him to thrash around again. Finally, someone who doesn't seem to be too hard, a new voice chimed in, causing Manga to temporarily halt his thrashing to listen. Ibara turned her attention toward the voice, only to find two figures standing several meters behind her. One of them appeared rather ordinary, with brown hair and nothing particularly striking about his appearance. Well, except for that orange jacket and matching pants. What was that all about? The other figure, on the other hand, had a mutant quirk. 6 arms, a peculiarly shaped head that contributed to a rather frightening image, and a mask covering his mouth up to his nose. His muscular build only added to the impression of a raging beast, but his intelligent gleaming eyes were a stark contrast to his appearance. The plain boy lacked any headbands, while the mutant had one headband for each of his arms, neatly and tightly knotted. "Tsuburaba, do not judge our opponent by their appearance," scolded the mutant, which seemed to make the other boy back down slightly. "Sheesh, it's alright Shoji. I didn't mean it like that." The boy quickly defended himself against whatever claim Shoji had made. Shoji nodded before turning his attention to Ibra. "I wish we could meet under different circumstances, but..." He glanced around at the chaotic scene with many aspiring students battling each other. "We sadly don't have that luxury." Ibra knew exactly where this was going, and she was now completely focused on them. "Whoa, hold your horses, girl." Tsuburaba, the brown-haired teen, gestured with his hands, palms outwards in a back-away motion. "We really don't have to fight. You can just give us your headband, and then we'll be on our way. Otherwise, my friend here has to take it away from you." He motioned toward Shoji, who looked rather displeased but remained silent. Tsuburaba's expression briefly soured before he masked it with a smile. "So, what do you say? We win, you win, everybody wins without any violence." He made a "come on, take the deal" gesture, and Ibra was slightly impressed that he even knew what that was. Her vines extended once more, slithering along the ground like hungry snakes. "I'm sorry," she said, although there was no hint of remorse in her voice. Her once moist eyes were now dry, and her tone was sharp and cold as a knife. "But I must disappoint you." Her hair began to lift, aiming toward the two of them. Each vine string resembled a predator ready to pounce on its prey. "Too bad." Tsuburaba sighed, but before Ibra could react, he exhaled loudly. It was her cue to unleash her attack, sending her vines hurtling toward them with full force. "I have a question. This writing style is a lot more casual as you probably expect from other fanfictions. My question is, do you like this one more or would you rather I stick with my more formal writing style? See the previous chapter? That was it anyway from me. Cheers." Why, how, and when? These were the questions currently on Manga Fukudashi's mind, all valid, and he had even found some answers to a few of them. Why was pretty simple: he wanted to become a hero. He had heard it was the current trend at the moment. The how wasn't really certain at the moment. He thought it might be because the religious girl had tried to convert him, unsuccessfully, mind you. It could be that, or maybe it would happen when he decided to join his team. On the other hand, he would have then accepted an invitation to join that girl's team. He wasn't sure if it would be any better than what he was currently in. That being currently ensnared in her hair quirk vines, to be specific. Or were they? At least, they were similar in color, structure, and the feeling of vines. At least, he thought the stinging pain was what it would feel like to be grabbed by a massive tsunami of thorny vines. This pain would only become stronger as long as she continued to wildly flail him around, as if he were a sack of potatoes. A very handsome sack of potatoes, if he did say so himself. Ibra, meanwhile, was above such petty thoughts, concentrating on her opponents before her. The brown-haired boy seemed to be able to create some kind of air barrier that blocked all of her attacks. Meanwhile, she kept her distance from the other boy who seemed to ignore the thorns on her vines and grab them as if they were nothing. He almost managed to spin her around if not for her quickly cutting the vines off. "Just give up and spare us the headache," the brown-haired boy mocked, wearing a smug grin while trying to maintain composure despite being out of breath. Ibra seized upon something. "I respectfully decline," she stated firmly. Then, new vines shot out of the ground a few feet behind him, while another set of vines approached him from the front. She had to give it to the boy, he was quick thinking. Instead of creating another wall to block them, he created air platforms, expertly dodging above. "This is it," she declared, preparing herself to finish this confrontation when a looming shadow pounced upon her. She had completely dismissed the mutant boy. How airheaded could she be? And now she was paying the price for it. It was far too late to react. Bam! She didn't know what she was seeing, but a giant block of words came out of her captive's mouth, slamming against the boy and launching him several meters away. "Oh my God! Finally, air again," the captive exclaimed, breathing a sigh of relief before realizing what he had hit. "Sorry about that," he called out, feeling a bit embarrassed. Not letting the opportunity slip away, Shiozaki immediately completed her attack, engulfing the entire person in her vines, burying them several layers deep as opposed to just one layer with Manga. With a determined exhale, she tightened her hold and molded the prison into a tight ball, now resembling a spiked chain ball. With a forceful gritting of her teeth, she grasped the other end of the vine rope and began to swing it around her, building more and more momentum. "You've never managed to do extraordinary things, Ibra. What makes you think you can do them now?" a voice taunted her. She turned around, glaring at the speaker, before exiting through the door. Closing her eyes in pain and unable to see her surroundings, everything now a blur, she prayed to God that her attack would hit the other opponent. Meanwhile, Manga had the unfortunate opportunity to feel what it's like inside a mixer. Stop! Please! Who are you trying to kill? Manga managed to say, with every word delayed by a second. Was that? It was, a tree. If he could just reach it. Stupidly, he was still mostly human in biology, so there was no scientifically possible way for him to reach the tree and stop that mad woman. But Manga Fukudashi wouldn't be Manga Fukudashi if he let something as trivial as the concept of the universe stop him from not dying. Please, if there is a God. He was not a religious person, especially now after meeting Shiozaki and witnessing her fanaticism. But if there was something like a God now. He vowed never to take the Lord's name in vain again. Shiozaki was pushing her limits. 18 turns now, whereas normally, she could only manage 7 before her vines would snap or her hands would give out. But something was urging her to continue spinning and spinning until there was no way they could survive. She came to an abrupt stop as she felt something collide with her vines. The enemy? No, they would have been launched away. Nobody should have been strong enough to stop her at this moment, except perhaps All Might. A lapse in her concentration, a break in her focus, was all it took for her vines to snap in two. The built-up momentum was now weaker but still strong enough to knock her enemy off his feet before sending him flying a good distance into the nearby forest. Sheet. She turned towards the source of the voice. The mutant boy, Shoji, if she remembered correctly, stared at the last visible location of his teammate before returning his attention to her. His eyes had a strange gleam, a mix of fear and respect. Wordlessly, he untied one of his headbands from his arm before tossing it toward her, and she easily caught it with one hand. Both of them just stared at each other before Shoji circled around her toward the forest and then sprinted away once he had enough distance. She didn't let her guard down until his silhouette had disappeared deep into the forest. She was honest with herself about her abilities. She wasn't 100% sure she could have defeated the other boy in her current state. Arg, Sheet. What the hell, man? You got 2 quirks? The familiar voice of her hostage snapped her out of her thoughts. She violently turned around in shock to see Manga tied to a tree. By seemingly nothing. Get me out of these vines. He shouted at her in confusion, struggling against the air itself, it seemed. She squinted her eyes, trying to see if she was missing something, but upon further searching for whatever it was that was binding him to the tree, it was either invisible, or her unwilling teammate was starting to hallucinate. Which, in turn, would mean that she was starting to also start hallucinating, a thought she'd rather not have right now or ever. Calm down, she tried to reason, hoping not all was lost. Although she wasn't really optimistic about the fact that her words would reach him, she had to try something to calm the boy down, lest she wanted to use her quirk once more. She wasn't even sure she would be able to constrict him in her current state. He had shown that he could indeed free himself from her, and now that she was weakened, there was really no way he couldn't. The boy continued to ignore her, something that annoyed her greatly, although she didn't show it outwardly. No, she would not be provoked by him. This is so unfair. How the hell is it allowed to get 2 kinds of quirks just like that? Did you win the genetic lottery or something? He shouted in indignation, straining against the vines that seemed to be holding him to the tree. Ibra felt something different after this comment. It wasn't the cold indifference she normally felt when people mocked her beliefs or her dedication. It wasn't like when she had her looks insulted or her personality mocked. No, this was just anger. Pure, unadulterated anger that was coursing through her veins from every fiber of her body. She needed to calm down and think this through. Who cared for the words of someone so inferior to her? Who actually cared about someone like him, who was so easily dispatched by her with no difficulties? Who would care about the words of that DMN monkey? In the blink of an eye, any stress or fatigue that was visible on her face and body vanished, fueled by another surge of adrenaline, this time driven by anger rather than fighting lust. Her vines were already standing straight once more. Even someone who normally could read the room perfectly but most of the time chose not to, felt something dangerously shift in the air. And one turn to his left revealed the crazy bloodlust emanating from the space around him. Sheet, if he didn't know any better, right now she was the complete opposite of angelic or holy, as someone, not him certainly, would have called her. Right now, all she resembled was an angel of death. And that glare was directed towards him and him alone. For the first time in Manga's life, he wished he didn't have the full and undivided attention of a beautiful girl. It was by pure luck and maybe another quick prayer to the Almighty that the vines around him immediately loosened and vanished, it seemed. He almost didn't notice, but in the last second, he managed to roll to his landing, avoiding the spiky vines that were sent. To his absolute horror, instead of grabbing the tree or colliding with them as he thought, they instead whipped around the carrier where his stomach would have been, leaving cut marks from the vines on the bark of the tree. Are you dash? Before he could retort, the girl completely went psychotic. Another vine whip came towards him. Stop! A large wall that was shaped in the form of stop blocked the attack, luckily not even leaving a scratch mark this time. His relief died down quickly when the vines bundled together in 4 pairs, intertwining themselves into a large vine before whipping at his shield again. This time it crumbled, along with it a bit of Manga's hope. Sheet, this girl's really some crazy fanatic or something. He started to regret not taking up her offer to join her team. Not like she wanted him on her team now, with the way she wanted to slaughter him. It didn't take long for the rest of the wall to crumble, leaving him without defense. Fortunately, stupidity and obliviousness were 2 separate things. He admitted he maybe wasn't the smartest tool in the shed, there were way more intelligent people on this earth than him. But even he knew that if an enemy attacked your shield and successfully did that, you don't just stand behind it and wait for it to collapse. So he ran away. Something he did a lot more on this day alone than he did most weeks. What the hell kind of school was this? He wasn't so sure anymore if he wanted to be here anyway. If it saved him from being literally whipped by this girl, then he would take his leave gladly. He looked behind him and almost wanted to scream louder than he already was. That girl was really chasing him, using her vines as some sort of bionic spider leg extension like some freaky mutant monster or something. For God's sake, who the hell did he PSS off in his last life for the samsara to think that this is equal karma? Bang, boom, kapow! One word of his quirk after another was sent behind him, making his throat ache. Maybe 2 more words before he would completely lose the use of his quirk for a few hours. Sheet, he should have really worked on his quirk's stamina. Not that it was really viable since he would usually already have coughed up blood or something. Hey, maybe he was becoming stronger. Arg! A searing pain ripped across his backside, exposing his flesh to the world. He could feel a slight liquid running down his back. She actually whipped him. God forbid, did she take some KNKY pleasure, or why did she decide to do that? Sheet, he really is out of breath now, and the stinging pain didn't help. Should he do it now? But what of consequences? Herg! Another whip to his back. She had to have gotten disqualified for that, but no, there was simply no announcement for her or anything. He really started to hate this school now. He looked once again behind him. He was actually a good distance away still, but not enough that she wouldn't catch him in the next few seconds if he didn't do anything. He gathered his resolve, which was nothing. Literally, all of it was already beaten, but screw it. He always did want to go out with a bang. He came to a stop and turned around in an instant, surprising the girl for a few moments and seemingly shaken her out of whatever the hell berserker rage she was in. Blast away. For a second, nothing happened, and she came to an immediate stop from her pursuit. In the next second, she felt like an invisible force or something was pushing her slightly away. In the second after that, the slight push transformed into a giant push hellbent on launching her away, and before she knew it, she was in the air, literally being launched a very good distance away. To make matters worse, her ears were ringing like mad, as if she had been standing right next to a giant speaker at a heavy metal concert for a day. Fukudashi slumped to one knee, shaking a bit. He tried to hold it all in, but bleared. A disgusting red liquid made its way out of his mouth involuntarily, leaving the poor boy even more exhausted. I really shouldn't have used this at the end. He scolded himself before propping himself up again and looking toward where the girl should have landed. Should have landed, since she wasn't there anymore, or anywhere in the sky. His heart froze as soon as he heard the telltale rushing noise of her vines beside him. He didn't even need to turn around to see them too close to dodge anymore. Sheet dash? A hard object collided with his head, causing him to spin and crash onto the ground. His head throbbed with pain, his blood pulsating in his head. There is no way something like this is allowed, he gasped, rising to his feet and locking eyes with the psychopathic girl. What the hell is wrong with you? He asked, pointing at her. She began. Thought that the Bible frowns upon stuff like that? Manga questioned in a subdued voice. Whether he was just shocked, experiencing blunt trauma, or something else, he had no idea. Ibra frowned at him once more. God smites sinners, she answered, moving closer to him. Manga didn't make any move to get away, continuing to stand in the same spot. Shiozaki abruptly stopped and snapped her head down to her feet. She lifted it and squinted her eyes to see better. She could have sworn she felt something brush over it. Hey! I think I now know where those vines came from, he exclaimed, excited. Now she was sure of it, something had grabbed her ankle earlier, because now it grabbed her whole left leg and tugged at it firmly. Unfortunately, For whatever invisible force he had managed to summon, it was of no use to Shiozaki since she simply extended her hair towards a nearby tree to root herself in place. HRNG. A grunt of exertion came from the boy, confirming her theory that whatever was grabbing her was his doing. Should have known that this wouldn't work. He conceded, the pressure on her leg subsiding. You finally see the errors of your ways? Ibra asked in a patient voice, like a parent to their child. She slowly released her own hold on the tree. Kidding. Come here. The same feeling that she had felt earlier when she was blasted away by the boy came over her again, only this time it was in reverse. Instead of being launched away, she was slowly sked towards him. Quickly reacting, she once more tightened her grip on a tree, only to feel the pressure increasing exponentially, uprooting the tree she was using as a hold and forcing her to fly in the direction of Manga. Manga, who had no idea what was going on anymore, made a grabbing motion in the air, making it feel like he had grabbed her. Not a second later, purple vines extended out of his hands. From, God knows where, holding the poor girl around her waist before tightening into a firm grip. Let's see how you like getting spun around. Honestly, he wasn't an evil person, nor did he want to cause harm to others. He was very petty, though. Increasing his speed to the max, he finally let the girl go, launching her toward the lake area, or was it a waterfront? He couldn't see it very well from where he was. Clapping his hands for a job well done, he looked at the horizon where he had launched the girl seconds before. He slowly lost his sense of balance, shifting from his left to his right leg before falling sideways toward the ground. Just a few seconds, he huffed, exhausted before metaphorically closing his eyes. Izuku's ears were his best weapon. He didn't talk much, especially with strangers, but he loved listening to his friends. Mashireo had complimented him on his ability to pay attention to others. But now, he had to pay attention to his enemy. A sneaky foe who could vanish and reappear at will, who could slip through anything like a ghost. He had to listen for the slightest clue of his presence, the faintest sound of his movement, the softest breath of his life. He caught a hint, a subtle noise on the wall behind him. He spun around and pointed. There, he yelled. IAS reacted quickly and punched the wall with full force. The wall cracked, but nothing else. Tisk, Izuku grumbled, annoyed by another failure. He was falling for the enemy's trap, letting him mess with his mind. But he was too quick for his reaction time and IAS punches, too cunning. He could only let IAS chase after the sounds he left behind, and by then they were gone. Izuku scanned the area again, but the hallway was still deserted. The only light came from the windows that displayed the fake city outside. The sun was bright and cast a beam of light on the floor through the window he was standing in front of, his back turned, feeling the comfortable warmth coming from them. Izuku thought about running. Maybe he could escape from this building. It wasn't like he needed the headband, if his enemy even had one to begin with. He almost wanted to start running, but before he could act, he heard another sound behind him. He snapped his head back, but saw nothing. Not even one of his kanjis. So that either meant he was getting paranoid or his enemy didn't manifest fully. Because at this point he was now very sure that he couldn't phase through the walls. Moreover, he was slowly guessing their quirk only allowed them to merge and or sink into shadows and then travel through said shadow to adjacent shadows. Otherwise he didn't see a reason why they wouldn't have manifested behind them a long time ago and or in their shadows. He still had some protection on his headbands, but the attacker shouldn't know about them yet. Except for the first time they got hit with his cut earlier, he still got the rest of them on his headband, not to mention his. He quickly checked his pockets. The pebbles were still there, along with their kanjis. Izuku acted swiftly, took his chance, and sprinted towards the exit shrouded in shadows. The door stood in a windowless section of the corridor. Just before his next step brought him into the dimness, he extended his hand and released a handful of small stones, scattering them across the floor ahead. He'd honed a unique skill during his training, the ability to control when his quirk affected him and when not. To his adversaries, the corridor now resembled a minefield, with each step punctuated by a resounding thud. But to him, it was just another walk. His decoy was doing its job. He could practically hear the whoosh sounds that his enemy would make when they emerged and or vanished. However, this time, he didn't glance back, there was no need. He had covered nearly half the hallway when he couldn't help but let a small smile creep onto his lips. Cut. Instinctively, Izuku froze, and his hand went to his head where he sensed his power waning. Something brushed against him, long and somewhat thick, like discovering a strand of someone else's hair entangled with his own, or tugging a hair free without detaching it. He reached for it and pulled his hand back, now forming it into a fist to secure the foreign object. As he unfurled his hand, he revealed a neatly cut shoelace, cleanly sliced in two. Heh! Without a second thought, Izuku whirled around, his fist poised for a strike, but it found only empty air. A split second later, he felt a punch landing on his back, delivered by another unseen assailant. Momentarily staggered, he swiftly regained his balance and launched a powerful kick, yet once again, his target eluded him. "Man, you really shouldn't have come into the darkness," a taunting voice from below him jeered. Without a moment's hesitation, Izuku summoned his IAS arm, seamlessly mirroring his own limb, as if he were donning armor. In an instant, it manifested fully, and he directed a fierce punch at the source of the voice. Small cracks appeared on the concrete floor, though he had little expectation of actually hitting them. Before he could react further, a sharp pain coursed through his body as something heavy collided with his back. It felt as though someone had leaped from above and landed on him with their feet first. "You know, you could always surrender," the voice taunted once more from behind him. Desperate to retaliate, he spun on the floor, attempting to sweep his unseen opponent off their feet, only to be met with the disheartening realization that there was still no one behind him. "You seem unhappy, should I show myself?" The voice once more mocked, this time every word he said coming from another direction, making Izuku whirl his head around him trying to find the source. He still didn't say anything, not dignifying the taunt with a response. "Behind you," they whispered in his ear. Kicking himself away from his position and instead manifesting IAS from his back to send a barrage of punches behind him, he once more felt nothing. Izuku relished the silence, and with that the fact that his enemy wasn't doing anything. He needed to come up with a plan quickly. "You aren't alone, are you? Who else is there with you?" the voice asked once more, now sounding a lot more serious than before. Izuku tried not to show his emotion. "Yeah, my teammate, 2 versus 1, you're sure you want to continue?" he asked while constantly looking around. More silence filled the hallway and Izuku almost thought they retreated. Until something white emerged from the wall itself, and to his horror it was a single pair of teeth and a mouth. Only the rest of the body was missing. "Nah, I take my chances," the mouth said in a taunting tone before retreating into the shadows before Izuku could hit it once more, only cracking the wall once more. "A feisty one, huh?" He was definitely taunting him now for no reason other than just spite, it seemed. "I can't give head or tails about your quirk. On one hand, you can punch from some weird direction and with a lot more force than a normal person should be able to." Izuku felt something grasp his pants and quickly executed a spinning kick, hitting the air but giving his enemy a weak point. Something shadowy with white hair had ducked under his leg before giving it an uppercut, causing him to fall prone. "Throw!" With not even a verbal response needed, IAS executed the command flawlessly, retrieving some stones out of his hands to throw at the participant, hitting him square in the head. HNG. Just before a punch could have knocked him out for good, his entire body sank into the floor and shadow, disappearing once again. "On the other hand, that weird effect thing you have going on," the voice drawled on, huffing and taking deep breaths it seemed. Boom. Izuku froze in the middle of standing up again. That was awfully close for his liking, way too close. And to his knowledge, only one person can cause this sound. There are many people wanting to go to the hero course. It's 1 in 80 that he would be here. TSK, great, another one. "Look, man, I think we've started on the wrong foot. How about it? I stop chasing you, and in turn, you distract that other guy coming here for me? Deal?" the voice offered half-heartedly, because not a second later, he added, "I'll be seeing you on the other side," before going completely still. Boom boom. The noise was now coming closer and closer to his point, and before Izuku could even think about it, his legs moved on their own to the opposite direction of the exit. Worst-case scenario, he had to jump out of a window. That wasn't so bad, was it? Right as he was about to turn a corner, the window to his left shattered into tiny little pieces, a body breaking into the building. Having limited time and being on high alert, Izuku wasn't as startled as he could have been, but still stopped in his tracks and turned. Another boy, this one he knew was the boy with spiky black hair that he kept with a headband to keep them straight. Said boy was using his arms as a shield to minimize the pain from jumping through a window and almost landing perfectly on his feet again. He landed on some of the glass pieces, slipping a bit and almost falling. If it weren't for Izuku's reflexes catching him. Now he could see that the headband he wore at the auditorium wasn't the only one on his body, having the same amount as him. He looked a little worried before the said boy frantically shook his head and gave him a sign of peace. The boy quickly righted himself before Izuku let him go, and the boy ran around the corner with Izuku. "A ways, look, man, I'm not looking for a headband right now," he introduced himself mid-running. Some stairs were to their right, which the boy took, Izuku following him. "But there is that crazy dude running after me, and I have nothing against him." A ways screeched frustrated, the explosion sounds coming from the floor where they had just been. "You don't have a solution to this?" he asked, referring to the still ongoing explosion. Izuku thought for a moment. "One, but I've never used my quirk like that. Do you trust me?" Awais looked unsure until another, closer, and louder explosion rang in their ears. "I'll take my chances," he conceded, and the two ran up another flight of stairs. Izuku, still a bit bruised, and Awais, apparently having run for more than just a few minutes, were both completely drained of their energy. A small break or nap would be all it took for them to recharge. Yet, the booming sound below them triggered enough concentration in their brains to release more adrenaline into their systems until the danger was escaped from. Both of them were now many meters above ground, around the fourth floor, as if it were a city where they might have seen some birds out the window. How can they afford to build a fake city of this size? Escaped from Awais' mouth breathlessly as they finally came to the top, closing the door behind them. Izuku didn't respond to the question. The same question did appear in his mind. This couldn't have been cheap, nor could it have been. The last booming noise was now right behind the door they had just closed. Awais froze in terror and sharply turned towards Izuku with a panicked look, unable to make a sound. Izuku himself was just about to suggest a plan before the door blasted open, the smoke obscuring the figure but the voice making it clear who it was. "Alright, you fucker, are you done playing cat and mouse with me and finally face me like a FING man?" The voice boomed with restrained anger poorly concealed with contempt. Stepping through the smoke was the same face he almost saw every day in school, the one he had dreams about, and not of the good kind, the one he thought could have been a good friend in another life. Kaken. The figure stopped in his tracks and froze as well, turning towards the source of the familiar voice. "Deku?" Their eyes widened in surprise, an instinctual response to disbelief as they watched the person they least expected to encounter in this battle royal. They continued staring at each other, the pursuer with his mouth slightly open, showing off his sharp teeth, and his pupils shrinking to the size of pebbles, solely focused on Izuku. Awais had literally no idea what was happening around him anymore but chose to keep quiet, slowly but surely moving inch by inch closer towards the person he trusted the most at the moment out of the two. "What the f dashed a?" he said aloud before his voice rose in anger and a hideous frown appeared. "What the f are you doing here, Deku?" Izuku also snapped out of his daze and grabbed Awais by his collar. "Jump!" he screamed before literally head diving from the building. "Oh my god, I'm surrounded by lunatics." Awais wept silently before he couldn't anymore. The force of Izuku's grab was enough to make him fall forward right over the ledge, now in a free fall from the top of the tower. Aya! He is going to die. That was how he was going to die. Not in some heroic stunt but because he fell off a building. Continuing to scream because what else could he have done? He got a quick look below him, the fast approaching ground. He couldn't cry because this was all just too overwhelming. He completely misjudged his speed, the ground was now closer than expected. Actually, it was already there. He was going to go splat. Like a gut punch or a vacuum vacuuming all the air in his lungs, his oxygen left his respiratory systems and made its way outside through his mouth. A gurgling sound, similar to a cat dying in a car accident, was produced before the pain registered, and he fell face-first into the concrete street. Alive. And not hurt? He stood abruptly up, sweating through his entire outfit, but he didn't care. His brain was still in vertigo, and he could barely keep his arms and legs from shaking. He continued to stare at the streets, breathing frantically with his mouth while his sweat cascaded down his face, waiting for the inevitable pain to register in his body. But nothing happened for a good 10 seconds, and before he even knew it, he started to slowly stand up. Nothing. No hurt, no pressure, or anything on his body. A hand came to his shoulder, and he screamed insanely, jumping back and smacking the hand away in terror. "It's me, it's me, it's me!" Izuku yelled frantically, trying to calm the boy down, which did the opposite, and Awais tripped backward, causing him to scream even louder. After his voice got hoarse and Izuku made no attempts to approach him, did he finally calm down. What the f was that? Instinctively, he summoned his quirk behind him, although that did nothing. Awais showed no reaction to anything happening. With a sigh, he explained, "My quirk allows me to store sound and release it as properties. With this stone," he picked up a few stones scattered around the asphalt road, "I stopped our acceleration to a halt." Awais listened attentively to the explanation, still in disbelief that he is alive. Slowly but surely, his breathing returned to a manageable state before he lay down and stared at the sky, contemplating. "Hey, could we have died just now?" Izuku remained silent, looking at him with concern, his eyes sweeping across the crossroad they landed in. Pure destruction surrounded them, craters and debris. I'm not sure this is allowed," Izuku answered instead. The crestfallen boy seemed to be satisfied with the answer. A sudden scream of anger above them made both of them freeze in terror, before a hand clamped down on Izuku's shoulder. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but we should run, the same teasing voice from inside the building said, and upon turning around, he could see why he said that. 2 more headbands adorned his body, and from the scream earlier, he could guess from whom. Kurwaro, by the way, the black-colored boy said before sprinting away. Both Awase and Izuku looked at his retreating form before the said form turned around. What do you want? A special invite? Run. That kick-started both of them to jolt out of their shock, Izuku quickly helping Awase stand up before both boys ran after him. The urgency in their steps matched the chaotic energy of their escape, racing through the aftermath of destruction as danger loomed behind them. Deku. The trio tried to drown out the voice that had just put the fear of God in them, unsuccessfully, and focused on running farther and farther away. Can I just ask what exactly you did to PSS him off that much? The only boy who wore a headband as an actual accessory asked the newcomer to their group. Well, he didn't really appreciate me sneaking up on him and stealing these points from him. And to PSS him off even more, I did the same stunt as you too, he replied with a cocky smile, the twitching in his hands betraying the adrenaline coursing through his body. Maybe we should. Kaaboom. All 3 abruptly stopped in their run and turned behind them. Holy shit. Izuku didn't really have any contact with Kaken after he met Mashireo and, in turn, didn't really keep track of his abilities, only assuming that he had gotten stronger and his explosions more potent over the years, but not actually seeing physical proof for that statement. No. What he just saw couldn't be the UA exams. He couldn't believe that a prestigious school like that would allow something like this to happen. What the hell are you 2 doing? A voice further away behind Izuku shouted. Kurwari, self-preservation quite high on his priority list, already ran away the second he saw the thing tumble. We have to get out of here now. Izuku didn't say anything. Quietly activating IAS, he turned sharply away, running at a moderate pace before his quirk activated and he got a sudden speed boost. He didn't look behind the entire time, not even when another loud crash alerted him to the fact that this whole city is going to be trashed. One tall building collided with another, recreating a domino effect of destruction. I'm regretting everything right now. Kurwari wheezed out next to Awase, Izuku far ahead of them with his quirk. Awase didn't dignify the regret with a comment and continued running for his life. The chaotic symphony of destruction echoed around them as they sprinted, each step a frantic beat to escape the impending calamity.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.